It's universally acknowledged that working late always sucks. Even more so when you're working at the SCP Foundation. This unpleasant state of affairs was being experienced by junior researcher Jeffries on March 1st, 2018. His unenviable task was cataloging old digital files that hadn't yet been ported over to the Foundation's new system. Some researchers had to be put on SCP-682 detail. Others were wrangling D-classes into the femur breaker to lure SCP-106 during an escape attempt. Junior researcher Jeffries was probably lucky. The greatest threat he was facing was his coffee running out, or maybe dying of boredom. He had no idea that in the files on the numerous hard drives in front of him, a nightmare was waiting. Something that would not only ruin his night, but potentially rewrite his very understanding of reality itself, even if he survived. What he found was a file marked Document 1763-EX001, created on December 2nd, 1984. Strange. He double-checked the files and found that the Foundation already had an anomaly in the 1763 spot, an interdimensional portal on Wall Street that showcased bizarre performance art, and he didn't have any records that showed a prior SCP-1763 had ever been explained, and thus removed from the roster. There was only one thing to do. He'd pour himself another tall cup of black coffee and get to work. Another leap down the rabbit hole, but this time, he didn't realize how deep the rabbit hole went. Back in 1984, a strange man in an unknown uniform visited a pig farm. He bought 40 of the farmer's largest swine and carted them off to some unknown purpose. Pig farmers are famous for not asking questions they don't want to know the answer to. Bad for business, you see. So this silent arrangement of money changing hands suited them just fine. These pigs, as it turned out, had just been obtained by the SCP Foundation and taken to a containment site in the wilderness about 80 miles away from that very pig farm. You can only imagine the amount of meat that it takes to feed some of the carnivorous anomalies that the Foundation had on site, and these pigs were intended to satisfy the appetite of just one of them, a creature that had first been captured over in the fields of England, where it terrorized the countryside, making livestock and farmers mysteriously disappear by the dozen. Naturally, the Foundation caught wind of the disappearances, worrying that the news could cause a panic if ever someone in the non-anomalous world realized what was happening. They spread false information about accidental deaths and diseases, muddled the waters, and did everything they could to prevent Britain at large from knowing there was a rampaging monster on the loose. Speaking of, the creature itself was huge, at least at the time of capture, 12 meters long, but it had proven exceptionally hard to catch for Foundation field agents stationed in the area. This was due to its primary anomalous capability, a unique form of camouflage that worked by altering the very perspectives of people around it. The more time the creature spent in any one location, both the larger it seemed to become and the harder it was to perceive. They were only able to capture it in the end by using a form of sedative gas that locked it into perceptibility, before carting it into a secure containment vehicle and taking it to the nearest containment site for analysis. This happened to be a little place called Site 94. There, a large containment area was devised, and it was placed inside, with motion sensor deployments of that very same sedative gas should it ever attempt to escape. And it was only a matter of when, not if. 30 members of Foundation personnel had already been killed by the creature since it was first contained. The pigs were taken to a different containment area. One would be taken each day and led with a leash down a long hall towards the secure containment ward, where the entity, now dubbed as SCP-1763, was waiting to be fed in its cell. Agent Harker was the one on duty this time, leading the pig along. He felt sorry for it almost. It had lived a full life up to this point. He'd read somewhere that pigs were highly intelligent animals. Most of them were as smart as a human child. And now it was just going to be dinner for some incomprehensible entity. What a way to end your life. His musings on the natures of the pig's life were quickly cut off by a horrifying sight. He reached the containment chamber and found it empty. The door, only big enough for a human to pass through, was ajar. Had it escaped? He'd read the file. The creature could alter its morphology. Sure, it typically got bigger, but what if it could make itself smaller? It could fit through the gate and be causing chaos around the facility right now. Agent Harker, in a blind panic, stepped into the containment chamber to assess the situation, and in that moment, his life was over. In the space of a scant few seconds, the air around him seemed to shimmer, as though something was moving that he couldn't quite see. Then, he felt the crushing bite force of jaws closing around his torso, with such strength that the air was pushed out of his lungs. Then, unable to scream, he was dragged back into the containment chamber, and the creature started eating, still completely unseen. Blood splattered the walls and pooled on the floor. When the other agents and guards arrived, they found the cell empty, save for all the blood and a confused pig wandering the halls. It seemed that the unidentified anomalous entity was far more intelligent a predator than they first realized. And worse still, on the rare occasions that the Foundation could see it, it was getting bigger. The second iteration of the file that junior researcher Jeffries read, dated 1989 this time, illustrated that the Foundation had taken a substantial leap in the caution of their containment procedures. Mere sedative gas wasn't enough. They also added corrosive fluid emitters in hopes of physically destroying the creature if it ever tried to harm Foundation personnel again. They also upped its daily diet to 2 adult pigs in hopes to sate the hunger that was becoming an ever-present danger to all personnel working in the sector. But seemingly in tandem with the improvements in security, the creature just kept getting more advanced, more dangerous, particularly in its anomalous mimetic camouflage. It was now 18 meters long, large enough that it could physically overpower anyone that it wanted to prey on. And now, it was able to selectively disguise both its appearance and sounds, making it effectively impossible to detect if you're the one it's after. Its adaptive abilities for stealth now seemed to accelerate at a constant rate, making its perceptibility as unpredictable as its morphology. And it was about to get so much worse. For reasons that were at the time unknown, the Foundation decided to dismantle the containment chamber at Site 94 where the beast was being held. The reason for this seemingly nonsensical action would become clear later, but what was immediately obvious were the consequences of letting the creature loose inside the site. In the space of a single day, hundreds of SCP Foundation personnel were killed. They were just standing around going about their day as the ginormous, imperceptible creature approached them. They didn't even realize anything was happening until the jaws closed around them, just like Agent Harker had experienced all that time before. The break room turned into a bloodbath. All that terrible screaming. The most frightening part was that none of these Foundation employees were able to fight back, despite so many of them being armed and dangerous, in theory. But how can you fight back against something that you don't even know is there? Because this was more than just not being able to perceive that the creature was there. Everyone somehow simply knew that it wasn't. In the same way you know there isn't a giant pink elephant floating above you right now. It seemed that the power of SCP-1763's mimetic camo was now so powerful that it could reach into the minds of everyone around it and edit their thoughts, removing itself and even its victims. That's why the unfortunate staff of Site-94 deconstructed its containment chamber in the first place. In their minds, it was an empty chamber, simply built for no reason. So why was it there, just taking up space where they could be containing more anomalies? They'd unknowingly unleashed their own demise into the facility. And it wasn't even the staff. When the creature ran out of Foundation personnel to kill, it even started killing and consuming the other anomalies kept at the site. It wasn't long until the entire facility was a ruin, with no survivors, being reclaimed by the woods around it. By 1995, people outside the base who were still aware of SCP-1763's existence decided to fence it in. They created a secure perimeter around the entire grounds of the old site, hoping to keep the monster contained so it couldn't reach the wider world and kill who knows how many people. This new containment area was dubbed Area 764. Information about SCP-1763 seemed impossible to proliferate. The official death count of the creature was around 30, despite everyone at the former Site-94 being considered lost. Anyone who entered the vicinity of the creature would lose knowledge of it, being affected by its anomalous perception effect. It was out there, not truly trapped, but rather caged within the illusion of security. Inside the Area 764 exclusion zone, it preyed on anything unlucky enough to still be inside. human or otherwise. But of course, that prey would run out eventually, wouldn't it? It would need to go further afield to get its fill, and that would inevitably lead it to the rest of us. However, if you read the file, you'll see that that simply didn't happen. Instead, the last update on the files regarding SCP-1763-EX didn't even have an object class. It seemed to have stopped existing, if it had ever existed in the first place, along with all of the people who'd once tried to contain it, and the measures for containment put in place. The whole thing had been nullified. There weren't even any remaining containment procedures, as though none were even needed. In the typical cold, neutral tone of Foundation documentation, it dismissed any need to perform further actions regarding the alleged anomaly. The closing words in the file were, "Several other iterations of this article have been located, referring to the entity as a physical creature. It is believed, therefore, that SCP-1763 was at one point both actively contained by the Foundation and not able to exert the range of anomalous phenomena available to it at present. Further interference suggests that SCP-1763's excision of itself from standard methods of perception is part of an ongoing trend, in which the entity is rendered less real over time, possibly as a survival technique, natural adaptation, or as a method of acquiring food. For obvious reasons, no elements of this hypothesis can be verified." After that, any remaining information in the file was corrupted. The trail went cold. Back in 2018, having finished reading the bizarre series of files on the drive, junior researcher Jeffries felt an odd chill creeping down his back. He'd read the file of many terrifying creatures before, but something about this one felt different, felt wrong. It just wasn't adding up. A creature that could alter its morphology, its physical body, as well as people's perceptions of it. Something that kept getting bigger, kept feeding, hunting, killing, all the while becoming harder to perceive as its reality and mind-warping camouflage evolved. He double-checked the records. There was no Site-94, never had been. There was never an Area 764 either, nor were there any records of the supposed deaths that the creature caused. But was that reality, or just what the creature itself wanted him to see, wanted him to believe? There was no way of telling. After all, the earlier files even said that the creature could edit and censor memories to keep itself concealed. If there was any truth to this, what would stop it from happening one more time? What would stop it from happening to him, right here, right now? Junior researcher Jeffries contacted one of his superiors, a senior researcher who also happened to be working late at the site that night. He needed a second opinion on this. The senior researcher read over the files with stone-faced neutrality, like he was reading the nutritional information on the back of a box of cereal, utterly unmoved by any of it. "This is what we in the industry call a self-cleaning oven, kid," the senior researcher said, getting up from the chair and yawning. "Whatever this story is, it's seemingly sorted itself out. I wouldn't worry too much about it. False reports, prank files written by disgruntled staffers on their last week in the office. People did crazy stuff back in the 80s. And with that, the researcher left, leaving Jeffries alone in the darkened cubicle farm, illuminated only by the dim glow of his computer screen. He went home a couple hours after that, but as he was driving the long wooded back roads to his house, he couldn't help shake the feeling that something was wrong. He looked over his shoulder or at the rearview mirror, seeing a dark and lonely road bordered on both sides by trees, not even a car in sight. He couldn't see anything following. Then again, he wouldn't, would he? Jeffries tried to push the thought out of his mind and keep going. That night, he went to bed and tried his best to sleep off the bad thoughts. The next day, junior researcher Jeffries didn't go to work. Nobody noticed, of course. If you asked anybody, and even checked the official records, it'd be as though he had never even existed in the first place.
Is this thing working? Yes, oh thank God. Okay, this is Research Assistant Jones aboard the Foundation submersible vessel Salacia. Approximately 1 hour after departure from a classified location, my submersible was attacked by an unknown anomaly. I've activated the emergency transponder. The Foundation should receive my location along with this transmission. Dear God, there's something out there. But at these depths, it's nearly impossible to see. The onboard computer's online. I've set it to compile entries from the Foundation's database to help me determine just what I'm up against here. Ha! Alright, it's ready. Let's take a look at just what the hell is down here. Okay, the computer collated a list of anomalies and arranged them by size for me. First up, SCP-835. These are a species of anomalous coral polyps, far larger than any other known species, some of them up to a meter across in diameter. They usually only form an oval-shaped central mass with an even larger polyp at each tip, both around 3 times the size in diameter. Oh dear. It says here that SCP-835 is incapable of moving itself freely. Okay, that might rule it out as being whatever's outside my sub. Let me see here. Okay, perhaps not. SCP-835 polyps will release large tentacles to anchor itself in place, but it can also use these appendages for feeding. Their tentacles are strong enough to damage plate steel and are coated with a sticky adhesive substance for catching prey. During testing, the outer coral shell of this anomaly has been found to be extremely durable, requiring a high-powered diamond drill to extract samples from it. SCP-835 can grow at an accelerated rate too, increasing its overall mass by around 22.5 kilograms every day? Okay, all well and good, but is there anything I can do to fend it off? Here we go. SCP-835's growth can be suppressed for 24 hours with the use of certain chemicals. Okay, never mind then, I've got nothing aboard like that. Hold on, what's this? The larger polyps on either tip of SCP-835's mass will release a massive semi-liquid matter multiple times a day, made of semi-digested solids, fecal matter, and disgusting. The mass also contains viruses, bacteria, and parasites that have only been found within SCP-835. The bacterium is referred to as 835-I5. Oh my word. Closer analysis of SCP-835 have revealed that the polyps themselves, while they might appear to be coral, are actually composed of human body parts. Bacterium 835-I5 contains within it the spores that can infect a human subject through their spinal vertebrae and will gradually turn them into an SCP-835 polyp. Oh god, that's ghastly. Somehow I don't think that's what I'm up against here. Whatever's beyond the walls of this submersible has to be much larger. Let's see here. How about SCP-3932? Okay, it seems that it's not an undersea creature, but a sound that affects aquatic mammals. The designation refers to a vocalization that can transform dolphins, whales, or other porpoises that hear it into SCP-3932 Delta. These aquatic anomalies are physically and genetically identical to non-anomalous dolphins. However, the core difference is that they will possess anomalous sapience after hearing SCP-3932. Well, I'm sure it's not a pod of sapient dolphins out there that are attacking me. Sapient orcas, I could believe. Wait a minute. Here. Instances of SCP-3932 Delta possesses minor psychokinetic capabilities. Well, that would explain why my sub's been rocking around so violently. In addition, SCP-3932 Deltas can recreate the same SCP-3932 sound to grant other members of their pod the same human-like level of sapience? Since having gained this intelligence, 3 separate dolphin empires have arisen. The Great Barrier Reef Confederacy, the Great Barrier Reef Empire in Exile, and the Dolphins Communist Republic of Indonesia. With the aid of the SCP Foundation, communications between these 3 empires has been enabled by teaching the instances of SCP-3932 Delta Dolphins Australian Sign Language and providing them with gloves in order to communicate. According to the entry here, they even have their own political climate. How fascinating. The relations between the 3 groups are said to be strained, but gradually improving. Well, it hardly seems like they'd be the ones attacking my submersible. How about these, though? SCP-3934, only a couple of numbers up from the previous aquatic nightmare. It seems that these are species of, my goodness, anomalous plesiosaurs? My god, those could grow to around 15 or 16 feet long. Wait a moment, though. It says here that SCP-3934s are only around half that size. They're miniature plesiosaurs. Classification is Plesiosaurus pygmaeus, with males only ever growing to just over 6 feet, and females averaging around 5.5. Oh, that makes sense. Of course they were anomalously engineered by Marshall Carter and Dark LLP. No doubt to be held captive in some grotesque tourist attraction. Ugh, those money-hungry leeches. Though created using anomalous means, SCP-3934 instances have no anomalous biology. and were intended by Marshall, Carter, and Dark to be sold to wealthy individuals in order to capitalize on the urban legend of the Loch Ness Monster? Typical. Hold on, it also says that all instances of SCP-3934 subsist on a diet of fish and aquatic flora. Seems unlikely they'd take a chomp at my sub. Okay, next entry on the list, here we go. SCP-1128. That's odd, there doesn't seem to be any descriptions of its appearance here. How helpful. Oh, I see. SCP-1128 is an aquatic anomaly that will attack anyone that receives a full description of its appearance whenever they enter any body of water. The description of SCP-1128 must be avoided entirely or limited at most. All detailed written descriptions of SCP-1128's appearance have been expunged from record, and any handmade or photographic images of the creature have all been destroyed. Those who are exposed to its description will suffer an attack from the aquatic horror. However, these attacks will only occur once a subject is submerged in any amount of water. Once this occurs, the anomaly will appear instantaneously at their location, and its ability to transport itself in this way has made it difficult for the Foundation to capture. Witness reports of SCP-1128 attacks have described those that it has targeted being dragged beneath the water's surface, some returning moments later in a panic, while others aren't seen again after initially going under. All of the encounters go the same though, with a cloud of blood in the water and what little is left of the victim floating up to the surface. Subjects who survive encounters with SCP-1128 are subsequently transported to an ocean. However, it doesn't seem that the file here lists which one. Oh, it's been redacted. Excellent. Very helpful to know. Any communication devices carried by SCP-1128's victims remain functional and have been used to track its approximate location. It says here that during an experiment, a member of D-Class personnel witnessed SCP-1128 eating an entire whale in one bite. The only known way to counteract an attack by the aquatic horror is if the subject that has received its description is given amnestics. This has to be done as soon as possible in order to erase their memory of any information about the creature. The only safely permitted description of it is that the anomaly vaguely resembles a gigantic shark. Well, something tells me that's not what's outside, especially since I don't remember ever hearing this creature described to me, or even seeing it described. Okay, what else does the database say? How could I have been so foolish? What if what's out there isn't an anomalous aquatic creature, but an anomalous vehicle? Okay, here we are. SCP-1861-A, an underwater vessel that resembles a First World War-era submarine, specifically the HMS Wintersheimer, one of the B-class boats used by the British Royal Navy. The monstrous vessel itself is 140 feet long. Okay. The subject will manifest during occurrences of SCP-1861, an anomalous meteorological phenomenon including heavy precipitation and fog that consists of salt water mixed with human blood and cerebrospinal fluid. Oh, delightful. Historical records indicate that SCP-1861 occurred once every 3 to 6 months since as early as 1916 in various natural and man-made bodies of water across the world. Okay, well from down here it's hard to determine just what's going on the surface of the water above me. There could well be an SCP-1861 manifestation occurring above my head. Okay, hold on, what's this? SCP-1861-B are humanoid entities that emerge from within SCP-1861-A and attempt to entice others to enter the submarine. Upon entry, a person will become another instance of SCP-1861-B, and the submarine will vanish into the ocean depths. I suppose that's why they call this anomaly the crew of the HMS Wintersheimer. Still, no sign of any anomalous divers out there, but there's definitely something attacking my submersible. Okay, it looks like the computer's compiled another entry that references an anomalous oceanic vessel and, oh dear lord, a giant octopus? SCP-2846, the collective designation for two concurrent phenomena that take place within the Gulf Atlantic region of the Atlantic Ocean. The first is SCP-2846-A, an enormous octopoid entity that closely resembles a cephalopod, although doesn't match any other known species, and there are certainly none that can reach such a gargantuan size. Here we are, size information. SCP-2846-A is estimated to be between at least 955 meters and 990 meters long? Neptune, I'm gonna be eaten by a giant octopus. What's this? SCP-2846-A will appear from the deeper waters during the Gulf Atlantic when there are storms taking place in the region. However, SCP-2846-A's attacks are often sporadic and will occur without any prior warning signs. Once emerging, it will attack civilian vessels, in particular cruise liners or merchant ships. Wait, okay, perhaps it's just passing me by. If this octopoid is really what's out there. The SCP Foundation's assets in the Gulf Atlantic region have co-opted the United States Navy's deep-sea radar in order to more accurately detect SCP-2846-A, only when it manifests. Although, according to this entry, that normally only provides an average of an extra 5 minutes preparation time. The other half of SCP-2846 is SCP-2846-B, an anomalous Pennsylvania-class super dreadnought battleship, similar to those deployed by the United States Navy during the First World War. The ship also manifests in deep waters, surfacing at a location being attacked by SCP-2846-A. The vessel will then engage in battle with SCP-2846-A, and the octopoid will retaliate until it has been injured or otherwise incapacitated. If that giant octopus really was down here, this anomalous ship would have appeared to take care of it by now, I'm sure of that. Oh, come on, computer, what else could be out there? I need to find out soon, otherwise I'll either run out of oxygen or whatever that thing is beyond these submersible walls will catch me. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Oh my word. No, please don't be what's out there. SCP-3000. I've heard other researchers talk about this monstrosity. They sometimes call it Anatashisha, or just the eel. It's been an asset to the Foundation for years. While it feeds, its body produces a black substance called Y909 that has powerful memory-altering properties. It's the reason the Foundation is able to produce amnestics. If that's really what's down here, then I'm good instead. SCP-3000 is somewhere between 600 and 900 kilometers long, and its diet primarily consists of human beings. Gonna have to shut off the submersible's lights. Everything not absolutely essential to keeping me alive, and just hope that my transponder signal reaches the Foundation. SCP-3000 can move its head incredibly quickly to catch and kill its prey. Worse, the eel has psychic capabilities. I've read one report where a Foundation agent under its influence started pressing his head against the window of this submarine while whispering one phrase over and over again. There's nothing. It says here that something similar happened to one of the Foundation divers that initially discovered SCP-3000 off the coast of India, following the disappearance of 2 fishing boats and a combined 15 crew members. The divers sent to investigate all suffered varying degrees of memory impairment, but one suffered intense headaches and began rambling that only the eel remains. The 3 of them were delusional, and 2 of them were eaten by SCP-3000. But hang on a moment. I haven't felt any symptoms like that the whole time. No headaches, no altered or missing memories, but if that means that it's not Anatashisha out there, then just what the heck is attacking my sub? Oh no. Okay, the computer has just shown me the ultimate probable entry, and it's even calculated the likelihood of an encounter based on my location. 98.8%. I must have drifted too far out, or dove too deep into the water. It's the Leviathan. To anyone receiving this transmission, this is Research Assistant Jones of the Foundation submersible vessel Salacia. Through error, my vessel has come under attack by SCP-169, the massive, ancient arthropod referred to throughout various cultures in history as the Leviathan, estimated to have been alive since the Precambrian era. It must have moved from its original location by my estimate around 3 kilometers. The creature's body is between 2,000 and 8,000 kilometers long, and we still know nothing about its nesting area or its feeding habits. We thought it was dormant, but I think it's waking up. It's found me. Please send help!
They'd spent hours making the costume. The 2 young boys, let's call them Johnny and Max, had always been on the creative side. Sometimes they got teased for it at school, but they didn't care. As long as they had each other, they could handle anything. They were best friends. Maybe one day they'd build great things together out of concrete and steel, but for now they worked with cardboard. Prior projects had included building a rocket out of cardboard in Johnny's backyard, like the kind that put a man on the moon. They'd also made a box fort like no other, more a box castle really. The kind that would stand for 100 years, as long as it didn't rain, of course. But all of that felt like nothing compared to the tunnel monster. To these two young friends, it was a thing of beauty. A fully articulated cardboard monster costume meticulously cobbled together from boxes, masking tape, cardboard tubes for arms and legs, and a little twine to bring it all together. Frankenstein, Dracula, Freddy Krueger. Those silver screen phonies were nothing compared to the tunnel monster. They even cut out eye holes in the head and drew the scariest snarling mouth that they could write below. The making was over, and now they were ready to play. Johnny and Max took the costume down to one of their favorite places in town, the abandoned Brechter construction site. To many would seem like a strange and dangerous place for two young children to play, but for Johnny and Max, it was perfect. After all, they were the age where they had more imagination than sense. Max would be the one wearing the costume. Johnny helped him put it on piece by piece, using extra masking tape and twine where necessary to fasten all the pieces together. Little by little, Max became the tunnel monster. The transformation was complete, and it was finally time for the games to begin. Johnny ran, wielding a stick as a defensive weapon while Max gave chase. He could feel his own hot breath within the cardboard mask. It was oddly exhilarating. He gave a monstrous roar and charged after his friend, chasing him into the child-sized pipes of an unfinished water drainage system. It was more fun than anything they could have imagined. Max really got into his role. He lunged forwards, grabbing Johnny with his cardboard gauntlets and tried to drag him back into the tunnel, all while giving low, guttural growls. Johnny laughed and swatted at Max with his stick like a knight wielding a sword. They ran and crawled through the tunnels, the best of friends having the best of times, making the kind of memories that would last forever. And in that sense, they were right. Something they made that day would echo on forever, but it wouldn't be something they would look back upon fondly. If they weren't so busy running through the tunnels, Max and Johnny might have noticed that something was amiss. They might have seen that, even though it was only 3 p.m. on a summer's day, the sky was beginning to darken. It may not have saved them, but it might have given them time to prepare for what was coming. Max was still chasing Johnny down a pipe, still fully in character as the tunnel monster, his arms extended to grab his fleeing friend while Johnny tripped. Max stopped to help him up, but something was wrong. When Max helped Johnny stand up, Johnny instinctually pushed him away, as though it wasn't actually his friend anymore. Max stumbled backwards in shock and horror. He could feel something changing beneath the cardboard. He suddenly was in pain, this terrible pain, like he was being pulled apart and put back together. He started to scream. It was a horrible sound like nails on a chalkboard. Johnny had to hold his ears as the screaming got louder and louder, but Max couldn't stop. He was hurting too much to stop. Johnny was crying. He didn't know what was happening, only that his friend was in terrible pain and that there was seemingly nothing he could do to stop it. Even Max didn't know much more than that, but he thought it might have something to do with the suit. It felt like it was full of fire ants, crawling and biting. It felt like his body was full of fire ants. He needed to take the suit off before it got any worse, but he couldn't. The suit wouldn't come off. He reached for the cardboard mask and tried to tug it off his head, but it wouldn't budge. He felt like he was tugging at the skin of his own face. He could suddenly feel everything that brushed against the cardboard, like it was connected to his nerve endings. The fear and the panic got worse and he kept screaming. It was a deafening, ear-splitting scream. He didn't know it, but anything electrical within a 200-meter radius was dying. TVs shut off, radios fizzled out, cars stopped running. Nobody who didn't work for the SCP Foundation would ever know why. It wasn't even 3:30 p.m., but the sky above looked black as midnight. Max was afraid, but all he could do was cling to the familiar. He lunged forwards and grabbed Johnny, pulling him into his trembling embrace. Is he still Max now? No, he doesn't think so anymore. He's something else entirely. As he held his friend, Max tried to dig his fingers into the mask and tear it off. They pierced through the cardboard, tearing holes into it. It was agonizing, but the mask stayed put. There was no escape. He closed his eyes just for a moment. Maybe it was a bad dream. Maybe he could make it disappear, but it didn't disappear. Only he did. Max was no more. There was only the tunnel monster. When Johnny woke up, he was disoriented and afraid. He was in complete darkness, but he could feel the old metal of a rusty railroad track beneath his feet. He didn't remember how he got there, and he didn't remember Max either. Not his face or even his name, but that's alright. Max didn't remember him either. When the terrified Johnny eventually found his way out of the old railway tunnel he'd somehow found himself in, he was rescued by emergency services and treated for dehydration. Because of the incredibly strange circumstances of his disappearance and reappearance over 4,000 kilometers away, it was only natural for the SCP Foundation to check in. But seeing as Johnny had no memory of where he was or who he was with prior to his mysterious teleportation, all they ever did was investigate the tunnel he'd appear in. Of course, they didn't find a thing. The case was closed shortly afterwards, written off as a kind of one-off spatial anomaly. Johnny was given amnestic treatment and reintegrated back into his normal life. He would never remember his encounter with the tunnel monster, but many would, for decades and decades to come. There would be stories and scattered witness accounts from all kinds of people. Maintenance workers doing electrical repairs on subway tunnels, sewer workers cleaning up blockages in pipes, road workers fixing the asphalt in underpasses. The challenge with being an SCP Foundation field agent is often separating the genuine leads from the urban legends and spooky stories. But the details here were all too similar and specific. After all, it would be such a strange thing to make up. A moldy old pile of cardboard boxes getting up and running towards you. But stranger still, these incidents and encounters were occurring all over the United States, with the only commonalities being that all of them happened in tunnels or tunnel-like structures. The Foundation didn't know if they were dealing with one entity or many. Another peculiar factor they observed was that sometimes people who had encounters with the tunnel monster then themselves appear in tunnels extremely far away from the ones in which they first encountered it. As far as the Foundation was aware, besides transporting them vast distances, it never actually harmed any of its victims. But according to one Boston sewer worker, Gus Zagrelia, when the tunnel monster laid its cardboard hand on him, he felt the most profound sense of paranoia and dread. He described it as feeling like 1,000 eyes in the dark, watching you die. Then he blinked and he woke up in an Arizona viaduct roughly 6 hours later. Everyone who reported a similar experience with the tunnel monster was detained, debriefed, and given amnestics by the Foundation. Eventually, they gathered enough data on prior encounters to accurately predict the next tunnel that the tunnel monster would manifest inside. A new mobile task force was formed to secure the creature, MTF Nu 4, also known as the Box Cutters. What they didn't expect was that when they finally engaged the beast, was that it was no larger than a human child. It wasn't some huge tunnel-dwelling nightmare, even after all these decades. The tunnel monster was little more than a frightened, lonely little boy. He growled, attempting and failing to come off as intimidating to these hardcore MTF members, and referred to himself as the tunnel monster. When they didn't react with fear and surprise like the others, he became subdued. They were able to peacefully apprehend him and take him back to Site 54 for testing and containment. Preliminary x-rays found that the cardboard costume hadn't just fused with the boy, it had completely transformed him. On the inside, he was filled with crude cardboard copies of all the major internal organs, with his blood vessels and nerve endings made out of colored pieces of string. They couldn't find any information on who the boy was, if he had ever been a boy at all, and he was given the designation SCP-3663. In order to find out more, one of the leading researchers on the SCP-3663 case, researcher Doyle, decided to conduct an interview with the tunnel monster. It had been the only interview with the creature to date, due to the emotional distress it caused the creature. When asked about its identity, it replied with only the tunnel monster. When asked why it attacked and teleported people to different locations, the creature replied, "The tunnel monster captures people. That's me. I'm the tunnel monster. I capture people and take them into the tunnels where I live. In the tunnels, the pipes. I'm the tunnel monster." As the interview progressed, the tunnel monster became increasingly upset until it began weeping through its cardboard face, finally culminating with its crying out between sobs, "Please, I don't want to play anymore." SCP-3663 only feels comfortable in tunnels and will teleport away in distress if confined anywhere else. As such, its containment chamber is technically the maintenance tunnels underneath Site-54, where it seems to have made a home for itself. Occasionally, if it experiences fear, damage, or stress, it may de-manifest and appear in tunnels elsewhere. At that point, the box cutters are deployed to collect 3663 once again and bring him back to Site-54. So far, there has only been one major containment breach with SCP-3663, but it was a little more deadly than you might expect for a boy-sized creature made of cardboard. The tunnel monster escaped from the Site-54 tunnels and began wailing in pain. It went positively berserk, attacking surrounding staff and trashing parts of the facility. Anyone who heard the wails of the tunnel monster reported becoming extremely psychologically disturbed by them. During this 4-hour rampage, the monster also tried multiple times to destroy itself with various implements, but was unsuccessful. After SCP-3663 was recontained, 2 deceased members of personnel were recovered from the scene. Autopsies showed the cause of death was a buildup of paper residue and wood pulp in all of their major blood vessels, as well as sinuses, ear tubes, and the majority of the digestive and respiratory systems. A number of other staff members were found to have been affected to a lesser degree, but are expected to make full recoveries. What triggered this explosive and deadly outburst? Not even the tunnel monster itself knew the answer to this question. But we do. At exactly the same time, a 79-year-old man passed away from natural causes after what seemed like a thoroughly unremarkable life. That man's name was Johnny. An SCP Foundation researcher sits at a table inside of a standard containment cell. These are often dangerous places to be, especially when the SCP you're supposed to be studying is one that you can't see. The researcher is taking notes, unsure of exactly what is going to happen next. He can hear the sounds of knives scraping behind, of flesh sizzling and searing from high heat. He braces himself as a burst of heat hits the back of his head, as if a fireball has erupted. An object floats through the air and settles in front of him on the table. It's a plate of food, and it looks delicious. It may surprise you to learn that there is no rule that the SCP Foundation must deal exclusively with violent and vicious creatures. Not every SCP held in containment shares the same malevolence and contempt for humanity as SCP-682, or the world-ending threat posed by the likes of SCP-2317. Some, perhaps not many, but some, are benign and might even seem outwardly friendly. But you'd still be taking a huge risk to assume that anything contained by the SCP Foundation is completely harmless. Such is the case with SCP-5031. As per the Foundation's containment procedures, this quasi-humanoid, meaning it appears to have some vaguely human features, is held in an airtight cell that is regularly checked by Foundation personnel on a bi-weekly basis. SCP-5031 has no need for regular nutrition or regular interactions from staff. The trick with SCP-5031 is not being eaten by it, since though it doesn't need food, it does still hunt and consume anything it encounters, human or otherwise. Avoiding being eaten is hard enough with creatures that can actually be seen, but like so many other creatures the Foundation keeps contained, SCP-5031 has developed an almost perfect defense mechanism, which is when observed, it will literally cease to exist. Some might choose to refer to this as a quantum lock. However, it is worth noting that traces left by SCP-5031 still remain observable when the creature has temporarily disappeared. For example, trails of blood and scratch marks left behind by SCP-5031 still exist when the SCP itself does not. Naturally, this makes both avoiding the creature and capturing it using cameras difficult. However, when SCP-5031's existence ceases, it still casts a shadow. From this, researchers have been able to determine several of the creature's physical traits. Based on its silhouette, it has been deduced that SCP-5031 levitates about half a meter above ground level, sports an abnormally small necklace head atop an elongated torso, approximately 1.9 meters long, with 3 sets of spindly lower arms that branch outwards. Using these arms and its loosely hanging body, SCP-5031 will lower itself to hunt any human or animal that draws near to it, and uses the blade-like tail to cut up food. Perhaps the most interesting facet of SCP-5031 beyond its defensive capabilities and apparent physical attributes are the series of 9 tests conducted by senior researcher Stanley Huxtable. Appalled by the conditions that the creature was being kept in, Huxtable took over the role of HCL supervisor for SCP-5031. Having grown increasingly frustrated and empathetic towards the creature, listening to its screams from inside its iron containment unit, Huxtable devised a series of tests to introduce SCP-5031 to various different stimuli as a way to better understand the creature, and hopefully keep it contained in a way that didn't seem to cause so much suffering. It's worth remembering that the SCP Foundation makes its mission to be cold, not cruel, in performing their duties to protect normality, and many of the researchers and staff are just as capable of having empathy for creatures as you might for a stray animal at a shelter. The first of Huxtable's tests involved installing speakers in SCP-5031's cell, through which a variety of different ambient and popular pieces of music were played to see if they had any effect on reducing the creature's stress. By judging SCP-5031's stress levels based on how much it screamed when compared to normal, Huxtable was able to determine how to best use music to calm the creature. SCP-5031 seemed to convey higher levels of stress when listening to Morning Forest, Deep Grotto, and Seaside Paradise ambience, as well as the best of late 60s British rock band Jethro Tull. However, the best of Mozart, Enya, Kiss, and Ben Folds produced dramatically different results, decreasing SCP-5031's apparent stress. Following this test, senior researcher Huxtable compiled a playlist featuring SCP-5031's favorite music. Over time, the stress-reducing effects of music on SCP-5031 seemed to decrease, but keeping the playlist on shuffle seemed to keep the creature consistently calmer than it had been previously. The next test involved introducing inanimate objects into SCP-5031's enclosure to monitor its reactions and how its stress levels were affected. When a softball was thrown into the enclosure, SCP-5031 immediately sliced the ball in two with its tail in one swift motion. A similar result occurred when researchers threw the creature a basketball, which was quickly punctured and sliced open by SCP-5031's tail. Its stress levels first seemed to diminish when the creature was offered a bowling ball, which it rolled around the enclosure and then later knocked it against a second bowling ball. However, when one of the balls chipped, rendering it unable to roll properly, SCP-5031's stress increased dramatically until a replacement was offered. Researcher Huxtable noted that SCP-5031 seemed to possess a similar level of motor skills to an average human toddler, with similarly explosive emotional reactions to match. Next, when given the choice between two food sources at opposite ends of its enclosure, SCP-5031 seemed to gravitate towards higher quality food, most notably favored cooked rotisserie chickens over animal carcasses. It even chose this option over a live chicken, using its tail to cut its food into more manageable bite-sized portions, rather than ripping its meat with its hands or teeth like many of its fellow SCPs. Researcher Huxtable recorded these findings and highlighted that, even though SCP-5031 didn't need to eat in order to survive, providing the creature with food of a better quality marginally reduced its stress. Senior researcher Huxtable next attempted to test SCP-5031's coexistence with other living subjects, each time making sure that the creature had been adequately fed to avoid any unseemly incidents. First, a live chicken was introduced. SCP-5031 rolled its bowling ball at high speed towards the chicken, increasing both its and the chicken's stress levels, and inadvertently killing the chicken in the process. When a second chicken was introduced, SCP-5031 gently rolled a basketball towards it, but ceased any further engagement after the chicken squawked from being hit by the ball. Next to be introduced into the enclosure was a blindfolded D-Class staff member, who was instructed to sit down and roll the basketball towards SCP-5031. After doing so for several minutes, the creature began to approach the D-Class subject, who was instructed to remove their blindfold to cease the creature's existence and prevent any potentially deadly incidents. Finally, researcher Huxtable had another Class D engage in a game of catch with SCP-5031 while facing away from the creature. This test proceeded successfully, and senior researcher Huxtable remarked how SCP-5031's motor skills were improving, albeit gradually and with some gentle encouragement. Through Huxtable's tests, the creature was learning.
The next test, focused on teaching SCP-5031 linguistic symbols, utilized LCD displays and buttons connected to a food dispenser. One display showed an image of a rock, and the other an image of a rotisserie chicken. After some brief probing, SCP-5031 was quickly able to understand that pressing the button under the correct display would dispense a rotisserie chicken for it to eat. The creature was later able to adapt when, the following day, the screen displays and materials dispensed were swapped, and then later set to swap at random intervals. When additional rock dispensing stations were introduced, this time displaying the word rock as opposed to an image, SCP-5031 was able to determine which station dispensed chicken through a process of elimination. Whenever the functions and displays were swapped, SCP-5031 would find whichever displayed the word chicken to receive its food. The final phase of this test presented SCP-5031 with a single station, displaying the word chicken, but with a button that would remain inactive unless the creature spelled out the same word with a collection of lettered blocks it was provided with. After some initial confusion and frustrations as to why the button would not dispense food when pressed, SCP-5031 was able to assemble the word correctly, not only activating the button and dispensing food, but proving to researcher Huxtable that the creature was capable of learning language. Huxtable continued to test the creature, encouraging it to spell words using lettered blocks as a method of communicating. By increasing SCP-5031's vocabulary and the amount of human interaction it received, senior researcher Huxtable observed that SCP-5031 was gradually learning to sing, albeit non-verbally, as well as to juggle with its 6 hands, and was even communicating its food preferences and dish pairings. Later, another Class D, D-52125, was introduced to SCP-5031's enclosure to aid in further testing. Through D-52125's instructions, the creature quickly learned to draw using crayons and created artworks depicting itself, its newfound friend D-52125, researcher Huxtable, a cat, and a rotisserie chicken. SCP-5031's new creative side didn't stop there though, as the creature quickly learned to play chopsticks in only 2 days once a piano was introduced into the enclosure. SCP-5031 even managed to start creating its own original, admittedly crude, compositions. Next, a spice rack was placed inside the creature's cell, and D-52125 demonstrated how to season meat. This proved to be SCP-5031's new favorite hobby, as it spent the next 3 days experimenting with different combinations of foods and spices, using its letter blocks to request more garlic powder. Interestingly, the creature only created artwork or music when D-52125 was present, but seemed to thoroughly enjoy its experimentation with food when left alone. Following this development, senior researcher Huxtable devised a new test for SCP-5031, providing the creature with cooking utensils and using D-52125 to demonstrate. 5031 was shown how to prepare a variety of different dishes, from hamburgers and tacos to Mongolian beef, steak, clam chowder, and profiteroles. In addition to a small peanut allergy, this 8th test revealed SCP-5031 to be a phenomenal chef, possessing culinary skills far beyond the average person. The creature quickly and enthusiastically embraced its newfound talents, concocting its very own brand new recipes, with D-52125 even volunteering to be the first to taste test 5031's dishes. It was shortly after this test that SCP-5031 spoke its very first word. And it should come as no surprise that the word was salt. Naturally, senior researcher Huxtable was very proud of the progress the creature had made with its development. The final test almost seemed to be what the creature was born for. Over the course of 2 months, SCP-5031 was tasked with creating a full 3-course meal, which would then be served to Foundation staff for Thanksgiving. SCP-5031 not only rose to the task, but exceeded all of researcher Huxtable's expectations, creating a meal that even Gordon Ramsay would be hard-pressed to find fault with. The creature created a first course consisting of sweet potato miso soup seasoned with turmeric. Next came a beautiful duck confit, glazed luxuriously with apple cider, and topped generously with sweet cranberry compote, paired with a side of butternut squash gnocchi and served on a bed of kale seasoned with truffle salt. The grand finale of the exquisite meal was a spiced cassava pie for dessert, complemented with the finest French vanilla ice cream and a maple hazelnut syrup. And SCP-5031 didn't stop there.
The creature also debuted one of its original musical compositions to complement the decadent meal it had created. As the staff enjoyed the food, SCP-5031 performed live from its enclosure the deeply moving Piano Concerto for 6 hands, to an overwhelmingly positive response from not only senior researcher Huxtable, but the entire Foundation staff. As a fitting end to the creature's tale, Huxtable reported that, during the Thanksgiving banquet it had created, SCP-5031's stress levels reduced entirely. New kinder containment measures that would keep 5031 safer but also far more contented were submitted for approval. Perhaps some of you may find it refreshing to learn that SCP-5031 isn't simply just another malicious, malevolent monster that the Foundation has to keep under lock and key for the safety of the world. Instead, SCP-5031 is a gentle, if a little frightening at first, creature that just requires careful and considered guidance instead of a cold iron cage and around-the-clock armed guards. Through testing, senior researcher Stanley Huxtable and his fellow Foundation staff were not only able to help the creature develop, but also found what makes it tick, and not just for the purposes of containing it. Instead, it is hoped that SCP-5031's creativity and flair for culinary and musical masterpieces can continue to thrive and grow, under the proud watch of researcher Huxtable. A huge, scaly foot descends onto the small, picturesque Japanese village, shattering buildings and crumbling streets. This is the mighty stomp of Fukeru, an ancient beast from the mountains. He has been awakened from his 1,000-year slumber by the firebombing of Japan by Allied forces during World War II, in the months leading up to the nation's surrender. Fukeru gives a bellowing roar of pure rage. His body is bulbous and rubbery, his head crowned by a series of great gnarled horns above his bloody red reptilian eyes. He is nature's vengeance for a world corrupted by humanity's evil, war, greed, selfishness. With every stomp, he collapses a new building with seemingly nobody to stop him. That is, until an exhausted voice calls out, "Cut!" from a tinny megaphone. The year was 1972. The studio lights go up. This isn't really an epic kaiju destroying a Japanese village. It's a man named Daisuke in a rubber costume stomping on a model village inside a Tokyo soundstage. As the blinding house lights go up, he removes the headpiece of the costume, gasping for air, his face glistening with sweat. The director, a man who we'll call Director Sakamochi, climbs off his high chair and trudges down into the set, a hand on the small of his aching back. "What did I do wrong?" Daisuke asked. "I was smashing up the buildings just like you said in the script. We've done this scene 15 times today." Director Sakamochi just shook his head and sighed in exhaustion, adjusting his glasses. "It just doesn't look realistic. I don't believe you're truly a giant monster destroying a village. It just looks cheap." A production designer who was standing just off the side of the set and was getting all too tired of shooting the same sequence called out, "That's because it is cheap. Lower your standards, Sakamochi. Some of us want to see our families again after this is done." This probably would have been the start of a heated argument between Sakamochi and the production designer, had an envoy from Gojo Studios, the financiers of the film, not entered the room and asked for Sakamochi to come with him. One of the film's backers wanted to have a word in private. Smash cut to a nearby cafe, where the backer, Mr. Ishii, was downing his 3rd cup of black coffee that morning. His face could pass for a scientific diagram representing chronic stress. He told Sakamochi that he and his fellow businessmen had been seeing the dailies for the film, and they weren't impressed. "You told me that this would be a hit to rival Ghidorah," Ishii said. "But there's no way we can sell this gaudy schlock to the international market. And we're going to get slaughtered at the domestic box office if you can't turn this disaster around, Sakamochi." The disaster in question was Fukeru's Assault, a kaiju disaster movie meant to cash in on the ever-popular series of Showa-era Godzilla flicks that had first started releasing during the early 50s. Godzilla had been a commercial and critical success for the suits at Toho. It had even become a monster movie superstar in the States among certain devoted cult audiences. So naturally, plenty of other production companies were eager to cash in on what seemed like a winning and easily repeatable formula. The movie was meant to be a low-budget, safe bet. Sakamochi was a reliable hired gun director who mainly made his bones directing commercials and TV specials. He likely had the skills to put forward a serviceable monster movie offering. But now, when it was most pivotal that the whole thing went well, the movie that Gojo Studios were hoping for just didn't manifest. Sakamochi tried his best to argue that he still had things on track. While the model village stomping scene was a little uninspired, he had something special planned for the sequence where Fukeru was defeated at the end of the movie. He managed to secure an incredible location, an abandoned town with these huge satellite dishes that in the movie would be converted into giant laser weapons that fired at the kaiju and killed it once and for all. He also created an incredible sound rig that would help him make up for not being able to afford as many extras as they need for the ultimate battle sequence. Despite all these assurances, though, Mr. Ishii wasn't impressed. There was, however, one potential way out. An industry secret that the folks at the studio had spent the last decade heavily investing in. "I'm gonna give you a card, kid," Mr. Ishii said. "You're gonna call the number on that card and follow the instructions. This is how we save this dog of a movie, you understand. Genuine production value, the likes of which even those goons at Toho have never even seen before." Sakamochi didn't know what to expect. Better special effects? A company that makes higher quality bespoke monster suits than the one that Daisuke was stomping around in? Truth be told, he'd take anything as long as it would save this movie. Perhaps he'd even keep his reputation intact in the process. That night, back in his apartment, Sakamochi studied the card. Daiju Producers. Strange. He'd worked in the film industry for a long time, and he'd never heard of this SFX company. But still, if the Gojo shareholders were willing to foot the bill, he was open to the idea. Sakamochi called Daiju that night and arranged a meeting the next day. A car arrived outside of Sakamochi's building the next morning, claiming to be driven by a representative of Daiju Producers. They wanted to take him on a tour of their facilities, just to make sure that they were the right ones for the project. This struck the director as a little strange, especially as the car driving him soon left Tokyo and started driving out into the country. "We need a lot of space to do our kind of work, Director Sakamochi," the representative said, giving the director some serious questions about what exactly their kind of work really was. These questions weren't in any way diminished when the car took him out to what seemed like a large warehouse or factory storage facility deep out in the Japanese wilderness. Its size rivaled the sound stages where he was actually filming the movie. It didn't make any kind of sense that these guys were just kind of special effects outfit. But still, he was out here at the behest of the company, the people buttering his bread. Things got even stranger when he was taken inside. The building seemed to have an unusual amount of security, guards, an absurdly number of strangely advanced locks, the kind of thick reinforced doors you'd expect to see in a bank vault rather than a cinematic special effects studio. The representative, who seemed unusually enthusiastic, led Director Sakamochi through the facility while talking to him. "We really believe in your film, Director Sakamochi. It has a layer of symbolism and intellectualism to it that I don't believe we've seen in a monster movie since the first Godzilla," he said, while leading the director through ever more reinforced code-locked doors. "We're very exacting about the projects that we choose to work on, but after Mr. Ishii sent us the script for Fukeru's assault, we became certain that this was a film of substance. That's why we think you're really going to benefit from what we do here." After that, they approached the largest and seemingly most reinforced door yet. The representative carefully interfaced with each of the various locks, and at that point, the door opened with a loud metal-on-metal grinding sound. Beyond, darkness awaited. Sakamochi followed the representative into a threateningly huge room, comparable again to the vast studio lots where he'd filmed so many commercials and TV movies over the course of his career. The whole hall was bathed in darkness, save for the far end where Director Sakamochi saw something he couldn't believe. Giant glass tubes filled of glowing liquid, each one containing something impossible. Real-life specimens of the Fukeru kaiju. Was it magic? Was it genetic engineering? He didn't really know. But the reality was undeniable. The people at Daiju Producers had literally created the monster that the movie was built around. And to what end? Director Sakamochi simply didn't know. "We've made 20 of them for you to start with, Director," the representative said, a glint of pride in his eye. "That should be enough to get started with. But from there, we're happy to fulfill repeat orders until the film is done. It's a lot easier to make these creatures than you'd think." That was something that Sakamochi would simply have to take the representative's word on. He was at a loss for words, half wondering whether he was just hallucinating all of this. But the more he looked, the more he could see that these were no mere special effects. They were organic creatures, breathing and twitching inside the giant tubes. This company had this strange and terrifying ability, and they used it to make living props for monster movies? An arrangement was struck while director Sakamochi was at the facility. They'd send him the monsters for the movie and even help him set up the laser satellites to make sure that the ending sequence would really knock people's socks off. And of course, as part of the deal, director Sakamochi also had to promise that he wouldn't tell anyone about what went on at the Daiju producers' facility, or this singular service might be lost to filmmakers of the future. A few days later, the director and crew were assembled at the shoot. The perfect abandoned rural Japanese town, surrounded by those huge structures with satellite dishes atop them. This would be the make-or-break scene. It was the sequence that, if it had succeeded, would make this movie iconic, and if it failed, consign it to the fiery pit of failure. But luckily for director Sakamochi, the fine folks at Daiju Producers were people of their word. After about half an hour of waiting, the ground started to shake as the trees parted and a giant scary monster came stomping through. Everyone in attendance was shocked. It was as though the Fukeru monster they'd all found so unconvincing was now truly real and walking among them. Only Sakamochi really knew what was going on, as the monster rampaged into the set and started smashing down buildings with monstrous fury. It was everything that Daisuke stomping around in his goofy rubber suit wasn't. It was raw. It was visceral. It was, well, epic. And as the thing unfolded, all director Sakamochi needed to do was point the camera and keep recording. It was some of the best footage he'd ever recorded. The sound effects that director Sakamochi had arranged all kicked in. The abandoned town felt like an extensive battlefield, with the somehow living monster reacting to all of the chaos going on around it. And then, the lasers began firing out of the satellite dishes directly at the kaiju. It was incredible. A show of special effects that would be a nightmare to do in post with 1972 technology. And once the lasers hit their target enough, the monster fell to the ground dead. Its corpse soon faded out of existence entirely, leaving nothing in its place. Astonishingly, even the structures that the creature had damaged were somehow repaired after the monster was gone, as though it had never even been there. That was exactly when the second one turned up. The representative of Daiju Producers had been true to their word yet again. They'd built many of these creatures, ensuring that director Sakamochi could get plenty of angles and raw footage on the fight so they could edit it all together in the aftermath. Monster after monster came, engaging in an incredible fight with the invisible army and townspeople, and the laser blasting radar dishes. Eventually, director Sakamochi had all the raw footage he needed to complete the film's most vital sequence, and the filming wrapped. They left that abandoned village to be just that. Just another abandoned village, not worthy of a great deal of attention. So, you may be wondering why Fukeru's Assault isn't one of the most iconic movies of all time in the beloved Japanese kaiju monster movie genre. Well, the funding for the rest of the movie fell through after Gojo Studios folded, and director Sakamochi knew better than to violate the promise he'd made to Daiju Producers. He never said a word of any of it. The problem was, even though the movie's filming ceased, the operations of Daiju Producers never did. They never received a notification from the folded studio, so they simply kept producing instances of Fukeru, which kept on playing out the script, battling with the invisible army and being killed by the lasers firing out of the radar dishes. It keeps happening again and again, a recurring looping kaiju attack that leaves no evidence in its wake. These incidents became known as Tsuburaya events when the SCP Foundation got involved and contained the whole bizarre scenario. And here's a fun little trivia tidbit. The SCP Foundation isn't even the first organization to work towards claiming this highly cinematic anomaly. That honor goes to the Imperial Japanese Anomalous Matters Examination Agency, or IJAMEA, an anomaly researching and containing organization created back in 1888 as a product of Meiji Japan's modernization program. However, much like Russia GRU Division P, it isn't what it used to be. What's left of the group now works in conjunction with the global reach of the SCP Foundation. Containment of this particular anomaly is thankfully largely self-perpetuating, given that the weapon satellites will always kill the deadly kaiju before they can break containment. All the Foundation needs to do is maintain a perimeter around the whole thing, preventing civilians from entering and being harmed during the Tsuburaya events. For all intents and purposes, this is an anomaly that clearly has a lid over it. But to this day, Daiju producers remain unaccounted for. If you end up seeing a monster movie where the star creature seems just a little too real, it's best to pay very close attention to the credits afterwards. You never know when the fine folks at Daiju give them a hand in getting so realistic. It was July of 2004, and Bill Murray was enjoying the peak of an extremely successful career. Not only had the iconic actor starred in some of the most beloved comedies of the 20th century, including Ghostbusters and Groundhog Day, he'd voiced the main character of the recently released live-action Garfield movie. It'd been a financial success, but it was a critical flop. Not that this bothered Bill. He was happy with the performance and the paycheck. What he wouldn't be quite as happy about was the horrifying encounter he was about to have with SCP-3166. On July 8th, Bill was enjoying a cold drink on the porch of his luxurious Beverly Hills home. The sky was beginning to darken as the sun set in the west. It was a blissful evening. His wife Jennifer was inside, watching TV. Nothing seemed particularly out of the ordinary until he noticed a quick flash of orange in the distance. It was almost too fast to register, this large orange shape darting past the corner of his eye. For a second, he entertained the thought that it might have been an escaped tiger, but it was gone too fast to really tell. Bill finished his drink and headed inside. He had enough for one night. The next morning, he got up to read the paper and found the Garfield movie getting slaughtered by the critics. One review stated, "No one can accuse Garfield the movie of infidelity to its source. It faithfully conveys the banality of Jim Davis's cartoon." Another called it, "a film without energy and without spirit." He put the paper down and ate his breakfast. A few blows to the ego were worth it for the paydays that came with big-budget family films. Just then, his wife came to him with a strange question. "Were you walking around downstairs in the middle of the night?" No, he hadn't. He'd been sleeping like a baby. Why did she ask? "Well," Jennifer said, "I heard some rustling downstairs last night. It sounded like something big." He hadn't heard anything though, and told her it was probably just her imagination. He put it out of his mind and continued about his day. He decided he would keep his eyes peeled for that orange blur again though. Bill didn't see anything peculiar the rest of the morning and went to a local cafe for lunch. He ordered a coffee and a cream cheese bagel, then made a quick trip to the bathroom while his food was prepared. When Bill returned to his table though, there was something strange. Instead of a bagel, there was a large heaping of lasagna on the table. What was going on? This cafe didn't even serve lasagna. Bill knew something was terribly wrong. Things only got stranger when Bill came home to find a small tuft of orange fur snagged on the frame of his front door. And it wasn't synthetic fur like you'd see on plush toys or stuffed animals. No, this was real animal fur. Maybe someone was just goofing off or trying to play some weird prank on him. But it didn't feel like it. Deep down, Bill Murray knew that he was in grave danger. Whoever or whatever was behind this, it wanted to hurt him. That night, his worst fears were realized. Bill's wife had left town for the week, and he was headed to the kitchen in the middle of the night for a glass of water, when he saw something, a huge figure moving up against the glass door leading to his backyard. The thing was huge, nearly 7 feet tall, with a bloated, fur-covered, misshapen body that was pressed up against the door. Its fur was bright, garish orange, a cartoon orange. Strangest of all, though, was the sound it was making. It sounded like it was purring. Bill backed away from the door and then ran back to his room to hide. The whole night he sat cowering as he heard scratching against the walls, like something was trying to get in. He was terrified and too scared to do anything, even move. Finally, as morning broke, the noises seemed to stop. Bill had to do something. He couldn't let this nightmare go on another night. What if things got worse? What if that thing managed to get inside? He called the local police, and when they arrived, he explained the incredibly strange situation as best he could. He told them he was being stalked by some kind of huge cat, or at least someone dressed like a huge cat. Also, there was lasagna involved. The officers interviewing him could barely contain their laughter as he told them his story. A giant orange cat? Perhaps, one of them theorized, he angered some kind of obsessive Garfield fan through his involvement in the live-action movie. After all, the original comic had been running for years and had been extremely popular. Who knows what kind of nutjobs were obsessed with seeing only a faithful adaptation of the source material. As the officers departed, Bill was confident that they weren't taking him seriously. He couldn't rely on any of them for protection. Thankfully, from a multi-decade movie career, he had plenty of disposable income and decided to hire a private security team to protect him while he looked into this mystery. He had 2 trained bodyguards positioned around his home at all times for the next month. They were armed and given the cryptic orders to fire on anything orange. Meanwhile, Bill began to fall down a Garfield rabbit hole. He felt strangely compelled to research all the Garfield media he could find, as though the answer to his terrifying situation was somehow hidden between the lines. Bill explored the entire backlog of thousands of comic strips. He read the books and interviews with Jim Davis. He watched the cartoons and straight-to-DVD animated movies. Ironically, for a guy who'd recently portrayed the lasagna-loving orange cat, Bill had never felt quite so immersed in the character before. He found the strange pathos in the routine of Garfield and his friends. One particular comic really piqued his interest, though. Originally published in October of 1989, the comic began with Garfield being woken up by a strange chill, an almost eerie sensation. The character observed aloud that he didn't feel like he was in his own home. He explored his little home further, trying to find his owner John or his housemaid and sometimes nemesis Odie, but found nothing. As Garfield remarked on feeling alone, a purple speech box delivered the sinister message. "You have no idea how alone you are, Garfield." He then finds that his home looks like it's been abandoned for years. The for sale sign outside is practically ancient. Garfield slowly comes to a horrifying revelation. Everyone really is gone, and his adventures and friends now exist only in his imagination. He's trapped in a prison of his own creation, trying to stave off his endless loneliness, in denial about the reality of his situation. The comic ended with a quote directly from Jim Davis himself saying, "An imagination is a powerful tool. It can tint memories of the past, shade perceptions of the present, or paint a future so vivid that it can entice or terrify, all depending upon how we conduct ourselves today." As he read those words, Bill Murray felt a chill down his spine. Why had he wanted to get involved in the Garfield movie in the first place? What had he gotten himself into? Before he could slip any deeper into his own mind, Bill heard a faint, choked scream downstairs. He felt his breath catch in his throat. He was terrified, but needed to see what was happening. He carefully and quietly began to creep down the stairs. At the bottom, he poked his head around a corner, and that's when he saw a member of his security detail lying dead on the floor. His face was blue from asphyxiation. His mouth was stuffed with lasagna. It looked like he had been force-fed to death. Bill wanted to scream, but he couldn't, or maybe knew he shouldn't. Just then he heard a soft, meaty thumping noise coming from the nearby living room. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to approach, as if by forces beyond his control. He made his way to the living room, and when he'd got there, he saw where the noise was coming from. Bill's jaw dropped in pure horror. There was the other member of his security detail, lying limp and lifeless under a giant orange figure. It was a grotesquely huge creature, wearing what looked to be a kind of crude Garfield outfit made of sewn-together cat pelts. It stank of pasta and rotten meat. In its giant paw, it held a golden trophy, which it was using to pound the security guard's head into mush, while making quiet, cat-like purring noises. The creature suddenly stopped and looked up, locking eyes with Bill. The fear of death came over him. He froze as the giant, freakish Garfield stepped over Donnie's corpse and began to come towards him. Bill turned and ran, but Garfield was gaining on him. Before he could make it to the front door, the creature knocked him over. He was laid out on the ground, looking up at it as it reached into its own body cavity and began to pull out handfuls of lasagna. He was about to shove a wad of the horrible, decaying pasta into Bill's mouth when suddenly a ding was heard, and the creature stopped. It looked up, as if sniffing the air, and then suddenly turned and lumbered towards the kitchen. Bill watched as the Garfield monster entered the kitchen where, somehow, there was a steaming hot fresh lasagna sitting in the open oven. The creature had sensed the presence of external lasagna and felt the compulsion to integrate it into its body, grabbing fistfuls and shoving it into itself. Just then, a group of highly trained SCP Foundation personnel burst into the room and subdued the creature. It had been an ambush. The Foundation had been tipped off to the presence of the creature by monitoring the local police department dispatches, and the report of a 7-foot-tall comic book cat terrorizing a Hollywood actor was definitely worth looking into. The monster that had almost taken Bill Murray's life was SCP-3166, a deadly pataphysical being that tends to manifest around people somehow involved in the Garfield intellectual property. It appears whenever the public perception of Garfield falls out of favor, and because Bill had starred in the critically panned Garfield movie, he was currently at the very top of SCP-3166's hit list. Thankfully, he managed to survive his terrifying ordeal, and was administered amnestics by Foundation personnel so that he could return to his normal life. This frightening and mysterious creature has been around since 1989, appearing after the publication of the haunting Garfield comic that Bill had read that very night. It appeared in the office of United Media, who were the publishers of the Garfield comic strip at the time, and began wreaking havoc. Since then, the creature's manifestation has been a constant threat whenever Garfield loses its popularity or audience. As a result, the Foundation has spent years as the funding source behind all Garfield media, and even planting hypnotic mimetics into the comic strips to ensure that there is always a loyal fan base. The fur is indeed real organic cat fur, albeit an unnaturally orange color, and instead of organs, the creature is filled with lasagna. Worst of all, though, is that testing has revealed that the meat in the lasagna is genetically identical to the flesh of Garfield's creator, Jim Davis. How did this thing come into existence? Perhaps it was Jim's sheer force of imagination that dragged it into being. As he himself said, an imagination is a powerful tool. All in all, it's lucky that Bill Murray was able to survive his encounter and return to his normal life. Well, as normal as life can be for Bill Murray. And if you see Bill Murray, don't bother asking him about SCP-3166. The amnestics were quite effective. And just as he's fond of saying himself, no one will ever believe you.
Joseph and Frank were two lifelong squatchers. No, that isn't an insult. That's a self-given title for Bigfoot enthusiasts who are willing to head out into the woods and search for the legendary Sasquatch firsthand. While most squatchers will go their whole lives without ever encountering one, Joseph and Frank were about to get lucky. They just didn't know what kind of luck. During a journey through the forests of the Pacific Northwest, Frank spotted something moving in the distance. A huge ape-like creature with grayish fur and human-like movements. Frank thought he was finally laying eyes on the mighty Bigfoot after decades of searching. What he didn't know was that he just made a deadly mistake. He had looked directly at SCP-1000, and there would be terrible consequences. Frank was excited. He just achieved the life goal of any squatcher. He tapped Joseph on the shoulder and directed him to look in the direction of the creature. Joseph followed Frank's direction and stared into the distance. When his eyes finally came into focus on the ape-like beast, he froze. His brain just short-circuited. One second he was about to encounter the holy grail of his hobby, and the next, he was literally brain dead. Joseph collapsed. In the distance, the ape-like creature disappeared back into the woods. Not that Frank even noticed. He was too busy trying to wake Joseph, but it was no use. Joseph was gone, and Frank had no idea why. The headlines read, "Bigfoot killed my friend." Most people either ignored it or laughed it off. Just a couple of cranks goofing off in a forest and one of them had dropped dead. Who cares? Well, one organization cared. The SCP Foundation. Mobile Task Force Zeta 1000. The Foundation's specialized SCP-1000 detail were alerted to the reports. They sprang into action, tracking down and detaining Frank for questioning. They process 1 million loony Bigfoot lovers every year and usually find nothing, but the death of Frank's friend made it all too clear. They hadn't encountered a Bigfoot, but a real, genuine example of SCP-1000. SCP-1000 rarely ranks among the scariest or most dangerous SCPs, but underestimating the creature is a terrible mistake, because just looking at it gives you a 2% chance of dropping dead on the spot. Frank, despite losing his friend, was one of the lucky ones. The Foundation debriefed him before administering amnestics and making sure that he'd never venture back into those mysterious forests in the Pacific Northwest region. Director Jones, the site director charged with the management of SCP-1000 populations, was given the information on this latest case of an SCP-1000 related fatality. It was a story he heard many times before. For Director Jones, they all seemed to bleed into one another. So what exactly is SCP-1000? And how did it leave poor Joseph dead in the woods? SCP-1000 is a whole species of large hominid ape-like creatures. They're largely nocturnal, but sightings of the creature during the day aren't unheard of. They're omnivorous, mostly seeming to consume plants and insects, and their fur is usually gray, brown, black, red, or occasionally white. The creatures have large eyes capable of impressive vision nestled underneath a pronounced Neanderthal-like brow. Another defining feature is the ridge of bone on the forehead, much like that of a gorilla, that is present in both sexes. According to Foundation studies, the creatures exhibit a level of intelligence on par with that of the common chimpanzee, but nowhere near that of us humans. What they lack in intelligence, though, they make up for in size. The adults can be as large as 10 feet tall and weigh up to 600 pounds. Despite their great size and impressive strength, the creatures are neither aggressive nor territorial. In fact, they seem to instinctively avoid humans, mostly residing deep in the forests of the American Pacific Northwest and in the Himalayan Alps. There have been sightings of SCP-1000 on every continent, though the Foundation has taken pains to exterminate all SCP-1000 populations situated near human population centers to prevent a potential disaster, considering the 2% chance of instantaneous death upon visual contact. That brings us to our second question. What is it that makes these seemingly harmless creatures so dangerous? Sadly, for both these unfortunate creatures and us humans, the danger is beyond the control of SCP-1000. According to Foundation research, SCP-1000 likely evolved alongside us Homo sapiens until a tragedy occurred between 10 and 15,000 years ago. A mysterious extinction event eliminated the vast majority of their species, leaving only 1 to 5% alive in the aftermath. What happened? It's believed that around this time, SCP-1000 contracted what the Foundation refers to as an anomalous pseudo-disease. Meet SCP-1000-F1. A disease that is passed along at the genetic level and is so durable that it persists in the species to this day. The tiny fraction of the population that are immune to its effects manage to survive, but the majority who aren't immune die shortly after birth. This is why the overall population remains relatively low to this day. It's a disease that only appears to affect hominids, including humans, chimpanzees, bonobos, and non-immune instances of SCP-1000. Any hominid that lays eyes on a carrier of the disease has a 2% chance of experiencing immediate brain death. While a 2% chance of instant death may not seem all that threatening, at least when compared to some other nightmare-inducing SCPs, the truly scary part is that the percentage is cumulative. In other words, the longer one observes a carrier of SCP-1000-F1, the higher that percentage rises, the greater your chance of experiencing an abrupt death. According to Foundation studies, the percentage rises by around 1% every 20 minutes, and the percentage also varies between specimens, with some exhibiting a terrifyingly high death chance of 90% upon viewing. This death chance continues to occur in dead specimens if they carry the anomalous pseudovirus while alive, though thankfully the risk doesn't appear to apply to small fur or tissue samples. The Foundation's true concern actually goes far beyond SCP-1000 themselves. Because of the species' close relation to Homo sapiens, there's a worry that SCP-1000-F1 could transmit to humans, causing our own species to meet a similar fate. If humans did indeed become carriers of SCP-1000-F1, it's extremely likely that humanity would undergo an unprecedented extinction event, with billions across the globe dropping dead as brain death sets in en masse. While full extermination of the entire species has been deemed unlikely, this existential threat they pose to humanity more than justifies the occasional culling of SCP-1000 populations. That was a lot to take in, right? First, the creature we thought was Bigfoot was actually a new species of SCP out in the wild. And second, these creatures could end human life as we know it if they made it into a population center. But what you're about to hear next, a dark secret only available to people with Level 3 SCP Foundation clearance, is the most shocking SCP-1000 fact of all. Are you ready? The true secret of SCP-1000 is that what you've just heard is a lie. There is no anomalous pseudo-disease,
and SCP-1000 poses no pathogenic threat to humanity whatsoever. Who would spread such a thing? The SCP Foundation, of course. Strictly speaking, the Foundation has disseminated two direct lies about the nature of SCP-1000. The first is that of the disease, which does not exist, nor has it ever existed. The second lie is about the creature's intelligence level. They're far smarter than the average chimp. In fact, they're every bit as intelligent as human beings. These were all lies formulated by Director Jones and the Foundation, as was the very existence of the Bigfoot myth. The Foundation has been spreading information that makes the very concept of the Sasquatch out to be a joke for decades, all to discredit and further push the very concept of SCP-1000 into the shadows. But why? The Foundation is no stranger to coming up with cover stories, but why would they put intentional lies into their own files to anyone below a level 3 clearance? Well, that all comes down to the horrifying truth behind the origins of today's SCP-1000 population. The creatures were first brought to the attention of the Foundation by outcast members of the Serpent's Hand, an organization dedicated to defying the Foundation's activities. These members, known as the Children of the Sun, told them the secret history of SCP-1000. While at first, Foundation personnel like Director Jones didn't want to believe what they were hearing, they soon came to terms with the horrifying truth. Humans and SCP-1000 did evolve alongside each other, with humans occupying the day and SCP-1000 the night. However, while humans were still basic hunter-gatherers, SCP-1000 were undergoing vast intellectual and societal development. They were able to create tools, weapons, agriculture, stable settlements, domesticated animals, and eventually even fully developed cities. It was like nothing the world had ever seen, and wouldn't see for thousands of years to come. Their numbers swelled into the tens of billions as they created culture and technology hitherto unimagined, including weapons of devastating power. Meanwhile, humanity was pushed to the brink of destruction by their competitors' rapid and seemingly unstoppable growth. It looked as though the human species had lost the evolutionary arms race and would have to bow out. But according to the Children of the Sun, a trickster forest god smiled upon humanity and gave them the power to use SCP-1000's weapons and technology against them. 70% of SCP-1000's population were wiped out in a single horrific day, known to the Children of the Sun as the Day of the Flowers, as every flower supposedly bloomed that day during the massacre. Humanity destroyed the entire civilization, and with the same technology they stole from these unfortunate creatures, the vengeful humans drove the apes mad. Their higher consciousnesses were blocked out, reducing them back into the states of mere animals. Once the massacre was done and everything that was built had been destroyed, we, the human race, used the SCP-1000 weapons to wipe any memory of the atrocity from our own minds. The advanced civilization of SCP-1000 had been wiped from history. Humans returned to their plodding path of evolution, none the wiser. For thousands of years, all the way up until today, this time remained a mystery to us. So again, why did the Foundation lie to us? What did they have to gain by convincing us all that it was dangerous to even look at these creatures? Well, as the frequency of sightings and the attempts of communication increased, people like Director Jones became aware of a frightening possibility. What if the pendulum was swinging back? What if the apes were regaining their lost intelligence and worse, still harbored feelings of revenge for what we did to their species thousands of years ago? Even the mere possibility that they could do to us what we once did to them is a chance that the Foundation simply cannot take, and thus, limiting contact between humans and SCP-1000 at all costs is an absolute must. However, in spite of the Foundation's fears, one intercepted message from the apes suggests that their paranoia may be misplaced. This message, translated from an attempt at communicating with Foundation personnel, reads simply as follows: "We forgive you. Given choice for now, not forever. Let us back in." It's enough to make you wonder what species the Foundation should really be keeping tabs on here. After all, when it comes to meting out violence and death, humanity has a track record to rival the worst creatures in the Foundation containment cells, and few examples illustrate that better than the tragic case of SCP-1000. SCP-682 must be destroyed as soon as possible. So begins the SCP Foundation file on the dreaded SCP-682, a highly intelligent reptilian monster that has, despite the Foundation's best efforts, proved impossible to kill. It may not be the most dangerous SCP out there, considering that some are capable of eliminating entire realities, but it's one of the most iconic. And you've probably heard tales of the monster that death forgot, and you know exactly why everyone is so afraid of the so-called hard-to-kill reptile. It's been subjected to some of the most deadly weapons and traps the Foundation could devise, and survived attacks from some of its deadliest fellow SCPs. But before we tell you about the Foundation's many failed assassination attempts against the so-called hard-to-kill reptile, we need a little more groundwork on what this creature even is. The first thing to know about SCP-682 is that this thing wants you and everything you know dead. Unlike some other creatures like SCP-096 and SCP-173, which are murderous but exhibit no real higher processing skills, SCP-682 possesses cunning, advanced reasoning, and even human-level logical intelligence. SCP-682 can engage you in conversation, but just talking to the creature calmly and cordially will sometimes cause it to enter its rage state, where it becomes even more dangerous and volatile. The beast is perpetually kept in a tank of powerful hydrochloric acid, melting its tissue to prevent it from reaching its full potential and going on a rampage. The creature's most terrifying asset, and the reason it's proven impossible to terminate thus far, is its incredible adaptability to any and all external stimuli. 682 is a reactive being, capable of not only surviving and regenerating from all attacks, but often incorporating those attacks into its own wide arsenal. In other words, if you're hoping to kill this thing, you better kill it on the first hit. Because if you don't, you better believe it's gonna hit you back 100 times harder. This brings us to the main event. Some of the SCP Foundation's most ambitious and frightening attempts to terminate SCP-682, or even understand how it could theoretically be terminated. There are quite literally too many unsuccessful attempts for us to list them all here, so think of this as a highlight reel of the Foundation's most prominent failures. 682 was first cross-tested with SCP-017, a humanoid shadow entity shown to be able to consume matter with its shadows and leave no traces behind. Tests on tissue samples from 682 showed that SCP-017 was able to consume said tissues with no adverse effects. However, when SCP-017 was placed into the containment chamber with the actual creature, 682 let out a horrific roar that was so loud it damaged nearby audio equipment. SCP-017 fled to the corner of the room, and 682, in its rage state, attempted to breach containment. Agents managed to suppress and remove the creature, but no meaningful damage was logged. Attempt failed. SCP-173, the killer statue, was later brought in, hoping that its thus far impeccable track record for killing would hold strong. The second that 173 was introduced into the testing area, 682 retreated to the far wall and began screeching intensely. It was intelligent enough to know what it was dealing with here. While the researchers and guards expected an instantaneous reaction, there was actually a stalemate for over 6 hours, as 682 stared at 173 continuously. Eventually, the tie was broken when agents shot out 682's eyes with high-caliber sniper rifles, breaking the line of sight and causing 173 to attack. Though 682 sustained damage to several parts of its body, while its eyes regenerated, the creature was not killed. It then regenerated a number of eyes all over its body, covered in a clear armored carapace that made them resistant to bullets. The stalemate continued for an additional 12 hours as 682 maintained perpetual eye contact. 173 was eventually removed from the containment unit, and the mission was aborted. Attempt failed. In their desperation, the SCP Foundation restored to bringing in another dangerous and seemingly unkillable monster to take on 682. SCP-096, also known as the Shy Guy. As astute SCP fans will already know, this being kills anything that sees its face, with no known exceptions, and when it enters its attack mode, it's thought to be quite literally unstoppable. Or at least, it was. While SCP-096 was able to destroy 85% of 682's original body mass during their 27-hour battle, it was left mentally broken, wounded, and huddled in the corner. To this day, if ever confronted with SCP-682, the Shy Guy reacts in pure terror, turning away and clawing at its own face. Attempt failed. During a deadly containment breach, SCP-682 also went head-to-head organically with another iconic SCP Hall of Famer, SCP-106, also known as the Old Man.
The old man and a shape-shifting psionic anomaly known as SCP-953 broke into 682's containment cell. The old man pulled both of his fellow anomalous combatants into his pocket dimension to continue the battle on his terms. However, despite losing 67% of his body mass during the ensuing pocket dimension showdown, 682 still prevailed, with the old man eventually fleeing back to his cell and 953 being collected and taken away by agents. Once again, SCP-682 continued to hold the title. But it wasn't just cross-testing experiments, intentional or otherwise. The SCP Foundation's quest to kill 682 led them to a number of more conventional murder methods, all with varying degrees of success. Due to SCP-682's highly adaptive abilities, some methods were discounted from the outset. For example, launching a powerful thermonuclear missile at the creature was soundly rejected by O5 Command, on the premise that if the creature wasn't destroyed and evolved to the point where it could shrug off nukes, humanity would be pretty much done for. Other ideas were abandoned just for being too ridiculous, such as one researcher's suggestion to fly the creature through the air and drop it from a considerable height, hoping to kill it with a high-altitude impact. I'm not sure we even need to tell you why that's a terrible idea, but during the experiments on SCP-682, the studies range from honest to incompetent to straight-up evil. One guest researcher fed 2 small innocent children to the creature just to see what would happen. He was then himself fed to the creature for his sadistic behavior, which was viewed as getting in the way of his professional conduct. After all, the Foundation is meant to be cold, not cruel. It was SCP-682 that had the monopoly on cruelty. Mimetic kill agents were a resounding failure. They attempted to dismember 682 with a powerful laser, only to have the creature develop reflective surfaces that displaced the beam and caused catastrophic damage to the area around it. They attempted to kill the creature by sucking all the air out of its containment facility and create a vacuum, but it expelled a dangerous gaseous compound that reacted violently and exploded when air was once again introduced into the room. The Foundation used high-precision blades to slice SCP-682 into approximately 12,000 pieces, then separated these pieces. Unsurprisingly, by this point, this attempt also failed. The 12,000 pieces reformed a short while later into the fully operational killing machine we all know and fear. In one particularly frightening display of intelligence and adaptability, the Foundation attempted to kill 682 with extreme heat, but it shielded itself by developing a second carapace composed of solid helium. When personnel entered the room following the failed attempt on the creature's life, it shattered its helium carapace into deadly shards that fired around the room and shredded all Foundation personnel in attendance. It had set a trap, and that trap had been wildly successful. The creature's ability to adapt to seemingly any offense is unparalleled, to the point where Foundation staff have no idea how to classify this creature, whether it's organic, inorganic, or even alive at all based on any definitions we could understand. At every turn, the creature just raised more questions. What is it? Is it possible to destroy it at all by any means? Who was even trying to kill who here? Because it certainly seemed like SCP-682 had a masterful KD ratio by now. More extreme feats of cross-testing continued in the Foundation's growing desperation to eliminate this monster. SCP-162, which is a hypnotic ball of sharp objects, hooks, and high-tension fishing line, was introduced to 682's containment cell. The hooks latched onto the creature and tore huge portions off, including its entire lower jaw and one of its limbs. However, 682 was still able to breach containment, kill 11 people, and badly wound 86 others. It regenerated its severe injuries in no time. The beast was even taken to the domain of the Gate Guardian, one of the proposals for SCP-001. The Guardian had a flaming sword hotter than the sun, capable of destroying its targets on an atomic level. Naturally, SCP-682 survived and regenerated. Perhaps the most fascinating cross-test of all was between 682 and SCP-053, who manifests as a kind, innocent little girl with the unfortunate condition of causing homicidal tendencies in all who come into contact with her for more than 10 minutes. The people with these tendencies would then attempt to harm the girl, but would immediately drop dead shortly after, leaving the girl intact. The researchers present anticipated 2 possible outcomes here. The optimistic outcome, in which 682 enters a rage state, attacks 053, and died for good, and the realistic outcome, in which 682 attacks 053, possibly experiencing some minor injury or nothing at all, and 053 had to be removed from the containment cell. But that didn't happen.
What did occur was considerably more shocking than any kind of violence. When 053 entered 682's containment chamber, the monster became uncharacteristically docile. Researchers and staff were baffled and watched with amazement as 053 approached the terrifying, immortal, mass-murdering monster and began to play with it. 682 even allowed 053 to draw on its face with crayons. Researchers thought they must have been dreaming, seeing this surreal display play out. 053 even appeared to have affection for this unkillable misanthrope. It was a single act in defiance of everything they thought they knew. When Foundation personnel entered the containment cell to separate the two, 682 went ballistic and killed multiple guards. 053 also wept, sad at being separated from her new friend. To this day, despite further testing, the Foundation has no idea how or why this happened. Like many details surrounding SCP-682, it's shrouded in deeply frustrating mystery. And so the tale of SCP-682 continues, in spite of the Foundation's best efforts. The monster continues to breach containment and slaughter with some regularity, taking out its seemingly limitless hatred for not only human beings, but anything that dares draw breath. Nobody knows where exactly the creature is from, what its true nature is, or why its ability to adapt and regenerate far exceeds any known organism on this planet. Perhaps one day, through enough research and cross-testing, we can someday answer these questions with scientific precision. But until then, we only have one answer. Hatred never dies.
We were a team, despite our differences, in spite of the terrible things they'd done. We were still a team. That's not how the higher-ups saw it, though. No. The guys upstairs with their perfectly pressed shirts. For them, we were judged by our level of expendability, and they knew that our next mission was a death sentence. One by one, that thing took out my team, my friends, snapping their necks so quickly and with such ease that no sooner did I hear the scream, they were dead. We had been used. I'd been used. Delivered as prey to the predator. A plot that was sanctioned by the bosses and approved with a blood-red stamp. Why did they do it? I'm still trying to figure that out. Maybe that's something you can tell me after you hear how these so-called scientific men left us in this cell. And in the hands of SCP-173. For me, it had been the best of times before it became the worst of times. The best, because I'd quickly risen through the ranks of the facility. The worst, because, well, I'll get to that. I was never the best student. I finished high school by the skin of my teeth, and my job prospects looked bleak. But I was lucky, I guess. Or at least I thought so at the time. You see, I have an uncle Siegfried who did some work for the government. I never actually knew what he did, just that it was secretive work. I used to imagine he was some sort of super spy, so you can imagine how excited I was when he found out I needed a job and he offered to help me out. I couldn't believe it. I always thought he hated me. I'd overheard him telling my parents that I was a no-good deadbeat, but now he'd had a change of heart and was willing to take me under his wing. What would I get to do? Undercover intelligence gathering? International assassinations? Just you wait, he said. And that's how I found myself walking into a sprawling, futuristic-looking facility where they handed me a level 1 security clearance card with big, bold letters that read, Janitor. But I was happy. Just the words security clearance made me feel important, and it beat flipping burgers. I pushed mops, turned off lights, fired up generators, clocked in and clocked out. But all that time they must have been watching me, grooming me, waiting for the day they could throw me to the wolves. I should have known. I've always been an expendable kind of guy. After a few years, I was called to an office, and there was a man in a plaid shirt and kind of a tweed jacket that professors wear. He asked me, "Do you have any idea about what we actually do here?" And to be honest, I didn't. I knew that there were many parts of the facility I couldn't enter. I imagined that down a maze of corridors were weapons being built, or prisoners being interrogated. But I had no idea about the anomalies. How could I? Before I was told anything, I had to sign a bunch of forms. There were so many I thought I'd get to find out who really killed JFK. And while they didn't come out and say it,
What I inferred was that if I ever talk about what happens at the facility to someone outside the facility, well, let's just say it's not the kind of thing they'd spell out on a piece of paper, but it involves padded cells and rusty tools. I wasn't scared though. I was part of something big, something secret, and I loved it. So I signed my life away with no hesitation. Soon after, I was introduced to my first anomaly, the safe class, of course. They took me to an observation room, and from that room I could see into another room with a sign on the wall that read SCP-067. I just stood there, waiting for something to happen, when in walked another guy in a white lab coat. "Welcome to your first anomaly," he said. "Is it okay if I hook you up to this heart monitor? We want to gauge your reaction to what you see." "All I can see," I told him, "is an empty room with a table and what looks like a pen on top of some papers." "Correct," he said, half smiling, as if I was some kind of idiot. "That's SCP-067. I thought about telling him that if I needed years of training before I could see a pen, that I probably should have taken that fast food job. Could have been a shift manager by now. Then they brought a young chimpanzee into the room, small enough to be harmless. One of the guys forced a pen into the scared chimp's hand and something strange happened. It started scribbling. Nonsense at first, but suddenly it was sketching and drawing faster and faster. I could catch glimpses of words and images. By the time they dragged it out, it was flailing around like it was possessed. "That pen has power," said the man in the lab coat. "A power whose source or origin we don't fully understand. That's why we're here. That's why you are here." One of the guys in the other room held the chimp's drawing up to the window. It was a perfect sketch of the Tower of London, intricate and brilliant. Above the sketch was the title, "Tower of London, Tudor Period, circa 1541. The year Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury, lost her head on the chopping block." Underneath that, the chimp had written, "Pity, she was no traitor. Take it from me, I was there." They didn't need to look at the heart rate monitor to see that I was shocked. That was far from the only anomaly I'd come into contact with, and I must have been doing something right, because in time I went from level 1 to 2 to level 3 security clearance, and that's when they made me a containment specialist. I won't bore you with all the details, but as you can guess, I dealt with the containment of anomalies. A lot of my time was spent looking through small windows and cell doors, making sure that whatever was inside was still inside and still in one piece. Other times I worked with field agents when anomalies were brought in, a transition period that the arrested freaks didn't much like. There was one certain anomaly, though, that I was tasked to oversee on many occasions. I like to think of it as my pet, but in hindsight, I was its pet. This was SCP-173, something that was in what we call the Euclid class, a classification meaning that we don't fully understand it, but know it is very dangerous. We know it's intelligent, we know it's unpredictable, and we know it will kill. And for that reason, there's people tasked with containing it and keeping an eye on it at all times. At first glance, you wouldn't guess just how dangerous 173 is. You wouldn't think it's incredibly intelligent. In fact, you'd think the opposite. That's because it's more or less a walking slab of concrete and rebar with stunted limbs and traces of spray paint that give the impression of a dopey face. We have to enter its cell twice a week for cleaning duties. It leaves a disgusting, foul-smelling liquid on the floor, a reddish-brown substance that I can only describe as a mix of blood and waste products. Where that stuff comes from has remained a mystery since we first contained it in 1993. Going into the cell was always a three-man job, because, and this is maybe the weirdest part about 173, it can't move if human eyes are watching it. That's why you need at least 2 people watching it at all times. If you were in the room watching 173 by yourself and blinked, you'd be dead before your eyes opened. We don't know how it moves that fast, but in that fraction of a second, your neck is snapped so hard it's almost like being decapitated. I've seen the videos to prove it. All it took was a sneeze. He wasn't even finished getting the rest of the achoo out when there was a flash and his partner was left lying on the ground. His head twisted around the wrong direction. So, you can understand why we now require 3 men for any time we must enter 173's cell. Then, a few months ago, I was told that a long process would begin to train and re-educate some future Class Ds. Class Ds are mostly prisoners with lifelong sentences, or those we've taken from death row and given a new lease on life. We were apparently understaffed, so why not employ these men whose lives had pretty much ended anyway? That was the rationale, or at least that's what they told me. I was told to train them on their new job, mopping up 173's mess, so that me and the rest of the containment specialists could focus on more important tasks. They hadn't been through the training I had, seen what I had seen. But after showing them the video of 173 nearly taking off a man's head, they were more than willing to follow the rules. They understood not to blink or turn away or sneeze, and that any lapse in focus could lead to a violent death. So I started to show them the ropes, how we move as a team into the cell, and always keep the others informed on what we're doing. 173 was always sitting in the corner of a cell, no expression on that crude face. But when we walked in its cell, I got the feeling it knew something had changed. I felt almost as if it was communicating with me, but I couldn't tell what it was trying to say. And then, it happened. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days from the last time we'd cleaned. As usual, 173 had covered the floor with that horrible liquid. We headed in to clean, my new team alert as always, and some of them cleaned while others kept their eyes focused on the thing in the corner. Things were going smoothly when we heard a noise I knew very well. It was the sound of the cell door locking. Someone must have screwed up. "Hey guys, we're locked in here," I shouted through the intercom. Nothing. "Guys, the damn door is locked." Nothing. I lost it a bit. "Open the door, will you?" Nothing. My team looked at me. The ones not on eye contact duty, that is, as if I should know what to do, hoping that this had happened before and that there was some kind of standard plan to deal with it. There wasn't. We were always observed when in the room, and I knew that a technician couldn't accidentally lock the door. It was impossible. There were protocols. Someone had done this on purpose. The four of us sat in the corner of the room as far from 173 as possible, our eyes locked on it. It didn't move an inch as usual, just stood, staring at the wall as it always did. We stayed awake through the night, talking a little, holding on to the slim hope that something had gone wrong. But as night turned to day again, we all began to lose hope. We weren't sent here to clean. We were a test. Totally expendable. Lab rats. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. We couldn't just stay up forever. That was a death sentence. I suggested that 2 of us stand, 1 sit and rest, and 1 get some sleep. We'd take shifts. A couple hours on, a couple hours off. Maybe we could show that we wouldn't give up. They'd have time to realize what they were doing was insane, call off the test, and come free us. We made it through a couple of shifts like this, and it seemed like we'd actually be able to make it another day or two when everything went wrong. It was my turn to sit and rest when I heard the worst possible noise. Snoring. The con next to me was sleeping quietly, so it must be one of the standers. I glanced over for just a split second and saw both of them, leaning against the cell wall dozing. At the same time, I saw the flash. Crack, snap, pop. One after another, their necks were snapped. I'm not sure how it happened, but I was standing again, staring at 173, who was now in the corner. Dead bodies with their heads twisted around piled up in front of it. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stare at this thing forever. I felt myself giving up. I lowered my head to the ground and then finally broke my gaze, ready to die. And then, nothing happened. I slowly raised my head back up and there it was, its hideous face inches away from mine. It was then that I understood what we'd been containing, what we'd underestimated. I felt it again, like it was telling me something. It was telling me to close my eyes, to sleep. So I did. But as my eyes closed, I didn't see darkness. I saw 173, or something like it, but not in the cell. I saw it outside, in the world, standing over children sleeping in their beds, watching. I saw them hiding in the shadows, staring out at passers-by. Then I realized they weren't watching, waiting to pounce. No, they were hiding. My eyes popped open as the door opened and in rushed 6 security personnel. They took me outside, jabbed my leg with a syringe, injecting me with something as the world faded away. Incident report. Time and date redacted. Following the experimental forced interaction with Euclid-class anomaly SCP-173, subject has ceased responding to external stimuli and appears to have taken on the traits and behaviors of the anomaly. Subject now spends entire day sitting in corner of cell staring at the wall. Staff are advised to proceed with caution when dealing with subject, as the only behavior they engage in is an attempt to strangle anyone who enters the cell. No treatments have shown any effectiveness, and subject will unfortunately require incarceration, likely forever. The fabric of our world is littered with strange doorways if you know where to look for them. Tears, portals, anomalies, all leading to places and planes beyond human imagining and understanding. And SCP-2317, otherwise known as a door to another world, certainly fits that description. Contained and kept at all times under the watch of armed guards, SCP-2317 appears to be a simple and unsuspecting wooden door in its frame. It hardly looks like it requires such extreme round-the-clock security, or needs a strange, secretive ritual that the Foundation performs, presumably to keep the door closed. But of course, sometimes the most interesting thing about a closed doorway isn't where it leads, it's what it keeps out. Even by the Foundation's already high standards, the requirements and regulations for personnel who are assigned to SCP-2317 seem oddly specific. Psychological testing is standard practice to work for the Foundation, but an additional hurdle that anyone has to clear before even getting to glimpse at this unassuming wooden door is having a score of at least 72 on the Milgram Obedience Examination. It is also mandatory that personnel assigned to maintaining it are both unmarried, with no children or next of kin, as well as an unwavering, unquestioning loyalty to the Foundation, pure devotion to its code and objectives. These may seem like strange requirements. After all, SCP-2317 is just a door, isn't it? Perhaps there's a reason that the Foundation keeps so much of the information about SCP-2317 buried deep under layers upon layers of security, with only the Overseer Council privy to the full details of its strange nature. Knowledge, as they say, is power. But maybe knowing too much about whatever is behind that door can prove deadly. Still, if SCP-2317 is a door to another world, an alternate dimension, or parallel reality, it must be safe enough to visit. After all, the Foundation has been sending personnel in there on a regular basis. Daily, in fact. According to the O5 Council, this is done as part of a procedure to maintain active containment of something lurking beyond that old wooden doorframe. But what could possibly warrant such constant maintenance and surveillance? In accordance with the Foundation's guidelines, all staff are required to rotate out of observing SCP-2317 after every 2 months, and spend the following 3rd month in full psychological counseling, before they are permitted to return to the containment unit housing the door to another world. It was after one of these month-long periods of evaluation that a Foundation guard was informed that his security clearance has been raised to level 3, and that he'd been selected for the duty of carrying out 220 Calabasas. He knew the name instantly. This was the title given to the daily containment procedure that absolutely had to be carried out. The guard didn't question these orders. After all, he'd been selected precisely because of his loyalty to the Foundation. He did make one request to his commanding officer, however. He wanted to know what had happened to the last guard that had performed the procedure. "Didn't make it out of psychological evaluation," the officer replied. Not letting this affect his dedication, the guard was told to prepare for Procedure 220 Calabasas. Along with a fellow member of Foundation security personnel, the guard was instructed to gather everything on a strange list. The first was a pre-selected member of Class D personnel, specifically a convicted murderer. Class D refers to disposable class personnel, expendable individuals recruited by the Foundation for the sole purpose of testing SCPs. Class Ds were usually prison inmates repurposed for SCP testing, and the one chosen for 220 Calabasas was no exception, serving multiple life sentences for murders, or at least that's what the guard had been told. A Foundation personnel member instructed him to refer to the Class Ds solely as the assistant from that point on. Next, the guard collected a live chicken, an obsidian-edged knife, a silver aspergillum and aspersorium, to be filled with 500 cc's of holy water that had been blessed by a priest of the Abrahamic faith, and finally, a 1 kiloton nuclear device, which according to instructions was only to be detonated in the unlikely event of a catastrophic containment failure, in other words, the last resort. After following his instructions to the letter and without question, the guard and his colleague were briefed. The Foundation personnel member informed them that he'd be joining and leading them in the procedure. The staff member also specified that henceforth he'd be referred to as the Celebrant until the completion of 220 Calabasas. The guard was acutely aware of how specific these instructions were, but trusted in the Foundation, knowing that if they wanted this procedure performed a certain way, then it was in everyone's best interest to carry out the orders to the letter. But what the Celebrant then went on to explain raised far more questions about SCP-2317 and the nature of Procedure 220 Calabasas. The Class D joining them wasn't actually a Class D. The assistant, as they were now referred to, was in reality another Foundation staff member, with a Level 4 security clearance specifically tailored to SCP-2317. Every member of staff entering through SCP-2317 and taking an active role in 22 Calabasas needed to be informed that this assistant was not to be harmed or treated as a member of disposable class. Fighting back the nagging question of why the Foundation would employ this subterfuge, the guard, along with his fellow security officer, the Celebrant, and assistant, prepared for their departure through the door to another world at solar noon, when the sun was highest over SCP-2317. Solar noon, chickens, and holy water. This all seemed like an oddly occult combination for the Foundation. As they entered the old wooden door, beyond lay a barren salt plain, stretching out for kilometers in every direction. This alternate dimension, according to the briefing, was designated SCP-2317 Prime. The guard immediately noticed a ring of 7 pillars directly ahead of the group as they entered, each of them bearing intricately detailed engravings unlike anything from any era of ancient history. Procedure 220 Calabasas was carried out quickly but carefully, the guard watching as the Celebrant and assistant were careful not to miss a step. First, the Celebrant scattered holy water into the center of the pillars with the aspergillum and aspersorium, looking down at his feet and keeping a steady pace as he stepped counterclockwise around them. The guard watched intently as the Celebrant completed his circuit around the pillars and turned to the assistant, anointing his head with holy water. 7 seals, 7 rings, 7 thrones for the Scarlet King, he said aloud. The assistant, with the obsidian blade in his hand, took the chicken and dispatched it in sacrifice, letting its blood mix with the holy water. He then repeated the Celebrant's circuit in the opposite direction, before stepping into the center of the stone pillars. Blood for the old gods, water for the new king, the assistant recited, pouring the remaining mix of blood and holy water over a patch of salt in the middle of the 7 pillars. Even though he knew it wasn't his place to question the Foundation, as the 220 Calabasas procedure took place, the guard couldn't help but wonder what all this was for. It seems so ritualistic, like something deeply religious or even magical. He never bought into all that occult mumbo-jumbo, even while working for the Foundation. But he had learned not to question anything, even the strangest and most inexplicable of sights. Little did he know that beneath his feet was an ancient and unknowable horror, a beast chained and lying in wait. Contained in a chamber directly underneath the pillars sat an impossibly large creature. Humanoid and obese, its body covered entirely in scales thicker than armor plating. Branch-like horns protruded from its jawless head, pointing up to chains that hung from the 7 pillars above, each one hooked into the entity's back. All but one of the chains was broken, a final withering shackle keeping the Devourer of worlds in its underground prison. Ever since 1894 BCE, when Erexian mystics imprisoned it, the Devourer has been waiting patiently for its inevitable freedom. It knows, as well as the Foundation, that nothing can be done to prevent the final chain from one day breaking. Even Procedure 220 Calabasas won't keep the creature contained. It's nothing more than a smokescreen, an act designed to create an illusion of active containment and maintain Foundation morale until a permanent solution can be devised to keep SCP-2317 imprisoned. Of course, if the guard had known this, it would have also explained the need for a 1-kiloton nuclear device as part of this staged ritual. Procedure 220 Calabasas had all the components to trick everyone below the O5 Council, emulating religious and occult rituals, the increased level of security surrounding the procedure and its purpose. and telling staff that any failure to correctly and completely perform the 220 Calabasas procedure will result in an XK class end-of-the-world scenario. All these elements work together to conceal the truth that one day the Devourer will escape and lay waste to our dimension. Knowledge is power, and maybe knowing too much truly is deadly. Perhaps if the guard had learned any of this, he'd have understood why his predecessor never made it out of psychological evaluation. Maybe if he had questioned the purpose of Procedure 220 Calabasas, he'd have learned the true nature of SCP-2317 and what that doorway kept out. But he was loyal to the Foundation through and through. As the team finished performing 220 Calabasas and returned through the wooden door, the guard took one last glance over his shoulder at the vast salt plain. The entire dimension was calm, silent, but not peaceful. It was patient. The entity had waited centuries for its time, and now all it would take was the breaking of the seventh and final chain. One day. The door was closed behind the guard as he, the celebrant, the assistant, and his fellow security officers stepped back through. Their work done and, as far as they knew, preventing catastrophe for another day. Only the Foundation higher-ups, the Overseer Council, are aware of the true danger posed by SCP-2317 and its sole inhabitant. Current predictions are that at some point within the next 30 years, the Devourer of Worlds will be freed. Any and all attempts to repair or recreate the chains holding it in place have so far failed. As such, the O5 Council has elected to continue providing Foundation personnel with the ignorant hope that Procedure 220 Calabasas is an effective strategy for containment. As we've said, sometimes the most interesting thing about a closed door isn't where it leads, it's what it keeps out. In the case of SCP-2317, the unassuming wooden door holds at bay an ancient creature of untold power that will one day break free and wreak havoc in our dimension. Nothing the Foundation does can prevent it, or keep it contained behind the door to another world. And only the Overseer Council knows that any and all efforts to do so are futile. With all that in mind, we can only hope that the doorway of SCP-2317 stays closed, at least for a little while longer. When an anomaly is first detected by an SCP Foundation field agent, it's up to the Foundation's mobile task forces to tag and bag the impossible entities before they can do any more harm. Sometimes these retrievals are uneventful, other times, not so much. Especially when they're dealing with brutal forces of nature like SCP-096. Also known as the Shy Guy, a creature that, from the very first interaction with the Foundation, had a reputation for being dangerous and needed to be feared. A series of vague sightings and mysterious disappearances up in the frosty mountains of the Yukon first sparked the Foundation's interest. When they were certain that they had an anomaly on their hands, two retrieval teams, Zulu 9A and Zulu 9B, were dispatched to secure and contain the entity. Zulu 9A took the lead in a heavy-duty chopper, equipped with 50 caliber GAU-19 heavy machine guns, and carrying an AT-4 anti-tank launcher. They were prepared for anything, or so they thought, as they established a visual on SCP-096 while 2 clicks away from the target. They couldn't get a clear line of sight on the creature, but it appeared to be stationary, docile, and was making no attempt to flee. Piece of cake, right? Little did they know that SCP-096 was just looking away from them. If it was facing towards them, it'd be a whole different horror story, as Zulu 9A were about to find out. The team landed their helicopter next to the creature and were shocked to see that it was completely naked, in spite of the sub-zero temperatures all around them. The creature was unnaturally thin, as though it had been starved for weeks, with bone-white skin and unnaturally long limbs. The team guessed that the creature's arms must have been at least 1.5 meters long, but its docile nature and insubstantial body mass gave the impression that it wouldn't prove too difficult to contain. That is, until they saw its face. Zulu 9A's captain was the lone survivor of the incident, as he was lucky enough to be looking away when the creature turned towards his team. The rest of the squad ended up staring eye to eye with SCP-096, and from that moment on, wasn't docile anymore. The creature began to whimper, then cry, then sob uncontrollably in a way that sounded eerily human. This sudden change in temperament startled the rest of Zulu 9A, and they opened fire on the creature. Under the hail of gunfire, SCP-096 entered a murderous frenzy and began tearing into the hapless squad of soldiers. While its flesh and organs did seem to take damage as a result of the barrage of 50 caliber rounds from the helicopter-mounted machine guns, its skeletal structure remained intact, and it continued its onslaught, tearing the team limb from limb, even after they'd blown practically all the flesh from the creature. The AT-4 anti-tank launcher proved equally ineffective at stopping SCP-096 while it was in attack mode. And it was only after slaughtering the entire team that it returned to its docile state. Nobody knows exactly what the creature did to Zulu 9A after the gunfire started, but no trace of the team was left behind. Zulu 9B touched down soon after, and with a grave warning from the captain not to look at the creature's face, they were finally able to subdue it. A bag was placed over SCP-096's face, which seemed to soothe it enough to move it to a nearby Foundation facility. Little did they know, they just obtained one of the deadliest SCPs of all time. And while it may have been under lock and key for now, it seemed inevitable that it would get out and cause more violence and chaos. Research and containment procedures for the SCP-096 were put under the command of Dr. Dan, a senior researcher at the site. It was his job to find out exactly what this being was capable of. And the more he tested, the more he realized that they were dealing with something truly terrifying. Disposable D-Class personnel were used to figure out exactly what it was that caused the creature to enter its attack mode. Just as it had during the initial retrieval mission, SCP-096 went berserk when any of the attending personnel saw its face. In this stage, it would enter a period of considerable and unstoppable distress for 1 to 2 minutes, covering its face and wailing loudly. When the period of distress ended, the creature would mercilessly slaughter every D-Class that had seen its face, and just like with Zulu 9A, no trace of their bodies would be left behind. Dr. Dan was horrified and intrigued by this phenomenon. The creature killed anyone that saw its face directly, but could the same be said for indirect depictions of the creature's face, such as images and videos? Dr. Dan was desperate to find out. More D-Class personnel were brought in to test this, to frightening results. Dr. Dan found that the creature did indeed still enter attack mode when people saw pictures and videos of SCP-096's face. The creature seemed to have an innate sense of when people were viewing these representations, even when it should have had no conceivable way of knowing. It didn't matter how far away or how many barriers were in place between the viewer and the creature, the attack mode would still activate. And once it did, it seemed as though nothing could stop the creature from hunting down the one who saw its face. With all of this new data, special containment procedures were devised to keep the creature safely under lock and key. Its cell was a 5 meter by 5 meter by 5 meter airtight steel cube, fitted with advanced pressure sensors and laser detectors to ensure that SCP-096 remained in its cell without risking anyone having visual contact with the creature's face. All cameras and video equipment were strictly forbidden, and weekly checks for any cracks or holes in the containment cell were mandatory. Of course, none of this would stop the creature if anyone somehow saw its face. In order to solve that little problem, Dr. Dan would need to continue his research. To find a method of subverting the creature's deadly glance, they needed to know exactly what they were dealing with. But how could they, when even a glance at a photo or video of the being meant certain death? A potential solution was proposed, creating an artistic representation of the creature's face, something that hadn't yet been attempted. But how would they achieve such a feat? Simple. They'd procure a D-Class prisoner with some artistic talent, and they found one who had been a tattoo artist before becoming a Foundation guinea pig. Dr. Dan formulated an ingenious plan for keeping this D-Class alive for long enough to accurately draw an image of SCP-096's face. He would be placed in a bathysphere diving bell several kilometers underwater and tens of kilometers away from the containment cell where the SCP was being held. The D-Class was made to look at a photograph of the creature's face and then replicate that image in a pencil sketch. Dr. Dan first confirmed that the creature's attack mode is only activated by the creature's face, by having the D-Class look at a series of photos of the SCP's body parts, one by one, finally finishing with its face. The D-Class began drawing and even remarked on how creepy the SCP's facial features were, despite not knowing the deadly context. Meanwhile, back in its containment cell, SCP-096 sensed someone viewing its face and entered its inconsolable crying state, followed by its attack mode. It broke out of containment easily and began making a beeline for the D-Class, traversing the miles between it and its prey. The D-Class didn't know it, as he locked the finished drawing into a separate, autonomous submersible, but he was already dead. As the drawing made its way up to a researcher on the surface, SCP-096 dived into the water and started swimming down towards the artist. Minutes later, the bathysphere was breached, and the D-Class was torn to shreds. SCP-096 was recaptured without issue by Surface Recovery Team Foxtrot 303A, and further testing on the drawing showed that artistic representations of SCP-096's face were in fact harmless. From this experience, we now know that the creature has a gaunt face with totally white eyes, possibly indicating blindness and a grossly extended jaw. Nevertheless, Dr. Dan was adamant that SCP-096 was too dangerous to be left alive, and requested permission from the upper echelons of the Foundation to terminate the creature by any means necessary. However, the doctor's request would fall on deaf ears, until it all started with a seemingly innocent image. While it's now been redacted for your safety, the black speck inside the yellow circle was once a minuscule image of SCP-096, taken unknowingly in the 1990s by a semi-professional mountaineer. One day they were looking at old photographs when his eyes passed over the tiny speck without even noticing that he had seen anything. But SCP-096 noticed and began entering its attack mode. It tore through its steel containment unit like tissue paper, causing the release of a nerve agent that killed a number of attending Foundation staff. The monster then fled the base and began pursuing its prey, with Mobile Task Force Tau-1 in hot pursuit. Dr. Alexei, who was helping to manage the site where the SCP was contained, was in dismay over the situation. Dr. Dan was out of the country at the time, trying to discover more about the creature's origins. However, he did leave the Mobile Task Force with a new secret weapon against the rampaging Shy Guy: Project Scramble. Scramble were state-of-the-art goggles featuring a new technology created by Dr. Dan, which, using artistic renditions of 096's facial features, could detect and scramble the features of SCP-096 into an unrecognizable form, preventing the normally deadly effect of gazing upon its face. In theory, this would allow MTF Tau-1 to engage safely with 096 once its prey had been eliminated and bring it back into containment. But disaster struck on two fronts. First, the prey in question was located in a population center, creating the potential for a huge loss of life. And the second bigger problem was that the scramble technology didn't work, as stray pixels of the creature's face would reach the eyes of the task force before the internal microprocessor had time to scramble them. The mission turned into a death sentence, as SCP-096 slaughtered almost the entire task force, as well as a number of civilians in town, including an infant and its entire family. It was a monumental disaster, made even worse by a final revelation. Dr. Dan and Dr. Alexei had themselves facilitated the entire containment breach and allowed the resulting massacre to happen, with Dr. Dan hoping it would be enough motivation for Foundation Command to greenlight his research into destroying the creature. Anything that would give him the opportunity to kill this thing would be worth the bloodshed. His plan worked, and the SCP Foundation saw it his way, approving his request to neutralize SCP-096. However, success comes at a cost for Dr. Dan. Once he figures out a way to finally kill the creature, though done in his line of duty, he himself will be terminated by the Foundation for his crimes against humanity. But considering how much damage SCP-096 is capable of causing if it ever got to a major population center, or even worse, was ever caught on camera and broadcast to a worldwide audience, the Doctor himself would likely deem his own death a justifiable cost. To this day, the Foundation is researching ways to kill the creature, and they're still looking for their silver bullet. And the pressure is on. They hadn't known about the seemingly innocent picture that sparked the last containment breach, the one taken decades ago, in which the Shy Guy had only occupied 4 tiny pixels. 4 tiny pixels that resulted in multiple innocent lives lost. So be careful where you look, because who knows how many other photos of the creature are lurking out there. Photos with an innocent dot in the background. Your eyes glance over it, not even noticing the little blip, until you hear a distant wailing that seems to be getting closer and closer and closer, and then it's already too late. Every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. It's an iconic line from It's a Wonderful Life, and even if you don't believe in angels, it is a pleasant image. After all, angels are the embodiment of goodness and light, so an angel getting its wings has to be a good thing, right? Well, as anyone who's ever eaten one too many Christmas cookies can tell you, it's possible to have too much of a good thing. Even something that sounds like the embodiment of all things good in theory can become deadly when taken to the extreme. That is where SCP-469, also known as the Many-Winged Angel, comes in. This angel-like creature is anything but innocent, and in fact it has been responsible for multiple deaths of SCP Foundation personnel during its captivity. SCP-469 may be deadly, but it is also undeniably beautiful in a mysterious, ethereal way. When first seen, it appears to be nothing more than a massive pile of pristine white feathers, like something out of a pillow commercial. The pile measures 24 feet in diameter and weighs at least 2 tons. However, like many of the entities contained within the walls of the Foundation's countless containment sites, all is not as it seems with 469. What looks at first glance to be a pile of feathers is in fact a dense, curled mass of giant wings. The wings vary in size from the tiny wingspan of a sparrow to the staggering 3.6-meter wingspan of the wandering albatross. The one thing they have in common is their plumage, with each wing being covered with the same glossy white feathers. The Foundation was able to perform a series of X-rays on the massive wings, revealing a skeletal structure beneath the feathers. Like those of a bird, the wings' bones are hollow. However, they are unnaturally soft and flexible, allowing for a range of motion that no known bird possesses. This accounts for the curvature of the wings and their ability to coil tightly into each other. The X-ray also provided the first and only recorded glimpse at the creature hiding underneath all the feathers. At the center of the layers upon layers of wings is a humanoid creature curled into a fetal position. In defiance of the laws of natural anatomy, every single wing appears to be fused to this creature's spine. How would it be able to move under the weight of these wings, or even if it could, is as of yet unknown. The first Foundation personnel lost to SCP-469 were D-Class personnel D-112 and D-624, who were sent in to investigate the nature of the creature and attempt to contact the humanoid entity identified on the X-rays. 112 and 624 entered the room, equipped with gloves and protective eye gear, as scientists watched the situation unfold on a monitor on a video feed. No one expected much to come of the encounter. The working hypothesis was the layers of feathers would simply be too thick to get through without seriously damaging the bones. It would be a fairly uneventful experiment, or so they thought. 112 approached SCP-469 first, and attempted to part a section of its feathers with his hands as 624 stood back and observed. The moment his fingertips touched the feathers, a rustling sound filled the room. The feathers began to quiver, shaking as if all waking up at once from a deep slumber. Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, the hundreds and hundreds of wings unfurled and pulled 112 into their depths. He was swept into a swirl of feathers, and within seconds, he had disappeared from view completely. Though 624 and the scientists watching on their monitor could no longer see him, they could certainly hear him. From the moment the wings pulled him into the sea of feathers, 112 had begun to scream in agony. His screams persisted, growing louder and more desperate even as the voice cracked and grew weak. 624 stood, frozen in place with fear and shock. 624 was ordered to attempt to retrieve 112 from the feathers, but made no move to do so. He simply stared at the feathers, eyes wide, face pale, as the pained shrieks of his colleague bounced off the sterile white walls of the containment room. A guard called over the intercom, threatening to terminate 624 if he did not attempt to remove 112 from SCP-469's grasp. This warning seemed to shock 624 back into action, and he made a run for the center feathers, arms up to protect his face. Again, the sound of rustling as the feathers began to quake. The wings unfurled once more, and 624 did not even have a chance to turn back before he was pulled in to meet the same dismal fate as the other D-Class. His screams of pain joined 112 as the scientists watching over the monitor could do nothing to help them. As the two men cried out in pain and horror from within their winged prison, something began to happen that the scientists had never seen before. The feathers started to shake again, faster than before, and at first the wings appeared to be unfolding again. Upon second look, though, it was clear they hadn't moved. There were simply more of them now. As the men continued to scream, more feathers appeared, the wings stretching out and elongating as new wings sprouted as if from nowhere. SCP-469 appeared to be feeding on the sound of their screams and using that energy to expand. It was only after several long minutes when the screaming finally stopped that the growth of the wings did too. At this point, the wings shifted again, expelling the bodies of 112 and 624 from within its folds, dropping them limply on the ground. Though their deaths were unfortunate, the loss of 112 and 624 did reveal some new information about SCP-469. First, that it could grow, and apparently needed to feed on sounds in order to do so. Second, that it was deadly to humans, and most likely to other living things as well. Autopsies of 112 and 624's corpses would later reveal exactly what happened to them, and how SCP-469 kills its prey. Though 469's feathers may look as though they would be soft to the touch, each feather is actually made up of sharp barbs that are capable of piercing clothing and skin. These barbs release a neurotoxin into the system that activates every pain receptor in the body of the victim. The neurotoxin present in these feathers has not been identified anywhere else in nature, but is somewhat similar in structure and function to the neurotoxins excreted by the cone snail and in the bite of the blue-ringed octopus. In addition to the pain-inducing neurotoxin, the feathers also carry several unidentified stimulant compounds, where the neurotoxin on its own would induce enough pain for the affected party to pass out almost immediately. The stimulants serve to keep the victim conscious. SCP Foundation scientists posit that this is so that 469 can get as much noise, in this case in the form of screams, out of its pain as possible, and achieve maximum growth before the captive creature dies or goes into shock. Further experiments confirmed this theory and showed that SCP-469 will react similarly when exposed to any living creature capable of making a sound and experiencing pain, not just humans. Non-living matter, though, including dead animals, elicit no response from 469. Additional experiments were then undertaken that involved applying various different sounds in order to test their effect on SCP-469's growth. Though it feeds on any sounds produced in its presence, it seems to respond most strongly to musical sounds, exhibiting a particularly strong response to classical music. No sound elicits a stronger reaction from this creature, however, than the sound of ringing bells. It is rumored that when a bell was rung in the presence of 469, the humanoid at the center of the feathers is said to have moved for the first time on record. Apparently, whatever is at the center appeared to wake up and unfurl its wings, revealing itself. But unfortunately, all security footage of this incident has been wiped, and the data has been expunged from the record, leaving the creature's true form a mystery. You may be remembering that 4 members of Foundation personnel on record were lost to SCP-469, and that only 2 have been mentioned so far. The second pair of casualties resulted when the Foundation attempted to terminate SCP-469, believing that there was no more scientific benefit to keeping it alive, or at least that the possible benefits did not outweigh the risks. It was ordered that SCP-469 be terminated by any means necessary. 2 skilled personnel, Dr. Jones and Dr. Smith, were sent into the containment facility in hazmat gear, armed with several sharp instruments. They were to attempt to use these to cut through the forest of feathers and soft bones until they could reach the humanoid at the center. It was presumed that once they did, and the creature no longer had the protection of its poisonous feathers, that it would be relatively easy to kill. They could not have been more wrong. Dr. Jones approached the dense cover of feathers with a pair of sharpened gardening shears, while Dr. Smith opted for a machete. At first, the strategy appeared to be working. Dr. Jones made several quick cuts, with feathers fluttering to the floor and sticking to the hazmat suit as Dr. Smith slashed into the feathers with his machete, making similarly promising progress. However, the situation quickly took a turn for the worse when Dr. Jones dropped her shears and let out a blood-curdling scream. The feathers had taken a little longer to get through the suit to her skin, but somehow they managed to find a way just the same. Smith grabbed Jones and attempted to make a break for it, but he was too slow and far too close to the feathers already. The wings wrapped around them and swallowed them both up, leaving the researchers outside helpless to do anything but listen to their screams and wait for them to go quiet. After several minutes, they finally did, and now larger SCP-469 had officially claimed another 2 Foundation personnel. Obviously, 469 could not be terminated using any methods that would place the responsible personnel within its grasp. That was simply too risky. So the Foundation selected a team of D-Class personnel to attempt to burn the feathers with an array of flamethrowers. Though the feathers were vulnerable to fire and began to blacken and disintegrate on contact, the sound of the flames being expelled was loud enough to feed SCP-469. Its growth was so quick in response to the noise that the fire could not keep up with the amount of new feathers and wings being produced. By the same time the flamethrowers ran out of propellant, 469 was the same size it had been when they started. Other terminations have been discussed, including the possibility of submerging the entire creature in a highly corrosive acid, but so far this has not yet been attempted. Whatever they end up trying, it is clear that nothing that produces a significant amount of noise will be able to kill 469. So where is it now? What's become of this perverse angel with the never-ending wings? Currently, it is kept in an airtight, soundproof chamber where nothing can trigger the growth of any more wings. So, what is it? An angel? A demon? A twisted, mutated bird of some kind? It is entirely possible that we will never know. But It's a Wonderful Life had something right even by accident. Every time a bell rings, something, twisted and deadly though it may be, gets its wings. A month ago, Dr. Robert Maxwell was a senior researcher working at the facility, but a tragic mistake had cost the lives of several of his co-researchers. Now he was being led down a bleak hallway in Armed Biocontainment Area 14, a rifle-wielding guard flanking him on either side. The once rising researcher had a very different title now, D-8724. He had been made a D-Class personnel, a death sentence. However, as the guards led him to his possible demise, he wasn't dressed in the typical D-Class orange jumpsuit. No, he was dressed in frilly Rococo dining wear more typical of 18th century France. If anything, Dr. Maxwell looked like he was on his way to meet royalty, and in a sense, he was. The former researcher had begged for any other assignment, but the site director insisted on committing Dr. Maxwell to tea time with SCP-082. He'd always been the talkative type, so the two would make a perfect pairing, and if the creature found him sufficiently amusing, then Maxwell might even leave the containment cell alive. He had heard legends of the giant creature they called the Cannibal. Maxwell hoped they were just stories. Dr. Maxwell was pushed by the guards into a large, luxuriously appointed room, and the doors were locked behind him. He felt like a child, surrounded by freakishly large furniture and 10-foot-high ceilings. The fog of obnoxious floral perfumes couldn't fully cover up the pervasive smell of death that lingered in the cavernous halls of 082's palace. Thanks to an elaborate ruse conducted by the Foundation, SCP-082 believed he was the King of France, and that his containment cell was a palace where he remained for his own safety. The creature's continued good behavior and everyone else's safety relied on visitors keeping up that lie. Maxwell had never worked in this area of the facility, so a lot of the standard procedures were new to him. Still, his superior had given him a clear directive: talk to the monster, communicate with him, be cordial and friendly, see if you can find out more about his mysterious past, and most importantly, if you want to survive, don't annoy him. The down-on-his-luck scientist gulped inside, trying to steady his nerves in this oversized fake French palace. He just kept thinking, surely he can't be that big. He almost talked himself into believing that the accounts of the creature were just that, tall tales, until a huge figure began lumbering into the main chamber. It was him, SCP-082, also known as Fernand the Cannibal. SCP-082 was an 8-foot-tall hulking monster, built sturdier than the castles it likes to imagine are its true home. Swollen, bloated, and grossly out of proportion, the creature clocks in at over 700 pounds. most of which is pure muscle that's almost impossible to pierce with conventional weaponry. SCP-082 stopped just feet away and stared at Dr. Maxwell with its beady, sunken-in eyes like a hungry rat. Just the sight of it struck terror into Dr. Maxwell's heart, but he didn't dare show his fear. Instead, he remembered his brief training, bowing politely and forcing a smile, referring to the creature as Your Highness, and profusely thanking it for granting him an audience. The monster continued staring without saying anything, and then gave a wide, lockjawed grin, showing off its huge teeth. It did everything through gritted teeth, except eat and sing. Dr. Maxwell hoped he wouldn't be a part of either activity. Fernand gave a low, booming chuckle. He thanked Dr. Maxwell for coming to give him some company and invited him to come further inside and take a seat, adding, with a sly wink, that he won't bite. The monster complained that he so rarely gets visitors to the palace these days, but he omitted the fact that the main reason for this was his tendency to devour them. Maxwell nodded and followed the giant deeper into its oversized abode. He couldn't help but notice that the monster's arms looked like huge, fleshy punching bags. He knew that if Fernand wanted to, he could easily crush him flat, just like he'd done to so many unfortunate guards during containment breaches. Fernand told Dr. Maxwell that he was thinking of having some decorating work done. The walls of his palace were starting to look awfully drab, and he gestured to one covered with a rusty red streak. Maxwell remembered that D-class cleaners were sent into the containment cell twice a month to tidy any of Fernand's messes, but they often ended up becoming one of the messes themselves. The creature encouraged Maxwell to take a seat at his oversized dining table, while he tended to a pot of what he said was full of delicious onion soup. Maxwell obliged his host's request and took a seat at a huge chair that made him look like a 6-year-old sitting at the grown-ups table. Meanwhile, Fernand was using a huge machete-like knife to cleave onions in half for his bubbling pot of stew. Even though Fernand had shown no signs of outward aggression, as he watched the cannibal hack away at onions with his enormous knife, Maxwell could feel himself beginning to sweat. After all, they didn't call this creature the Cannibal for nothing. This was a monster with a truly horrifying body count. During previous containment breaches, it had taken enough tranquilizer to put down 2 elephants to subdue the creature, but not before multiple agents quite literally lost their heads in the process. Fernand was able to bite them off with one huge chomp like he was eating a drumstick, snapping right through the bone with his incredible tooth and jaw strength. Surprisingly, when he wasn't on a violent rampage, Foundation researchers had found SCP-082 to be unusually polite and forthcoming, offering the researchers plenty of information about himself and his past. The only problem was that almost everything the creature said was a complete lie. From his time as a researcher, Maxwell knew that there were only a few details about the creature that could be ascertained for certain. SCP-082 would reliably answer to the name Fernand, and genetically, Fernand was technically human. The means by which Fernand became so grotesquely huge, strong, and cannibalistic are still unknown. Foundation personnel are still looking into whether it's due to some kind of anomalous genetic mutation or by more supernatural means. All we know is that he's big, unpredictable, and extremely dangerous. Dr. Robert Maxwell sat terrified at the dining table of SCP-082, listening to Fernand's slightly dull blade chop through the final onion, which he then tossed into the boiling soup. Fernand had switched the topic of conversation to one of his favorite fictional characters, Hannibal Lecter. Of course, Hannibal the Cannibal isn't quite so fictional to Fernand. While he's been shown to be extremely intelligent in terms of puzzle solving and memory, he seems to have no understanding of the distinctions between fiction and reality. He assumes all movies and TV shows are a form of documentary or reality television. And ever since seeing The Silence of the Lambs, Fernand has been eager to meet with Dr. Lecter, which he emphasized to Maxwell over and over. Since trying to explain the concept of fiction to Fernand had never previously worked, Maxwell simply told him that Dr. Lecter is extremely busy at the moment, but will visit whenever he gets a chance. This seemed to satisfy Fernand, who placed 2 large bowls of steaming soup on the table before sitting down a little too close to Maxwell. He couldn't help but notice that the giant cannibal was now sitting within biting distance, and as a lowly D-class, nobody would be rushing in to save him if things went south. Fernand began ranting through his clenched teeth once more, occasionally stopping to consume a hefty spoonful of onion soup. Maxwell was sure to do the same, not wanting to seem anything less than polite. But soon the tenor of Fernand's rant began to shift. Typically, the monster spoke French or heavily accented English. Now he was affecting the accent of a Victorian gentleman, peppering his speech with tally-ho and the game is afoot. Maxwell was confused at first, but quickly realized the game Fernand was playing. It's well known that Fernand is a pathological liar who likes to play numerous characters, changing his mannerisms and clothes accordingly. These personas have included a vampire, Big Bird, Andre the Giant, Foundation researcher Dr. Bright, the Incredible Hulk, Alexander the Great, Captain Hook, Dr. Frankenstein, and Frankenstein's monster. And, of course, in this case, the iconic fictional detective, Sherlock Holmes. Fearing for his life in this strange situation, Dr. Maxwell did the only thing he could: play along. As Fernand reeled off his Holmesian delusions, Maxwell began to play the role of Dr. John Watson, asking follow-up questions and complimenting Fernand's impeccable deductive reasoning. And it seemed to be working. Fernand played along too, acting as though the two of them really were Arthur Conan Doyle's crime-fighting duo. Towards the end of their game, Dr. Maxwell was even starting to enjoy it, amazed that his quick thinking was actually keeping him safe. But just then, the cannibal froze, as if in a trance. He locked eyes with Dr. Maxwell, like a mad dog that you can't tell if it's going to bite you or not. He saw the creature's gargantuan teeth separating, its huge jaws stretching open. This could surely only mean one thing. Dr. Maxwell winced and prepared for death, cursing that all of his quick thinking had amounted to nothing. Fernand leaned towards him, his gaping maw with its hot onion-scented breath just inches away from Maxwell. And then, he began to sing. The cannibal broke into a raucous Victorian pub song, happy and jovial. In his moment of terror, Dr. Maxwell had forgotten that this was the other reason SCP-082 opens his nightmarish jaws. Relief washed over him, as he knew he was safe, at least for the moment. Not long after, Foundation guards arrived and escorted him from the cell, leaving the delusional giant to his own devices back in the so-called palace. The former researcher had done it. He had bested Fernand the cannibal, and hopefully it would be the last time he'd ever be face to face with that deranged giant. Unfortunately for Dr. Robert Maxwell, in a performance review later that week, one of his superiors remarked that Fernand enjoyed his company and he had done a great job. Such a good job, in fact, that Fernand insisted he have Dr. Maxwell for dinner, or any other meal for that matter, sometime very soon.
It's 3 a.m. and the facility is quiet. Office workers and administrators roam the halls. Security officers stand at their posts, clad in advanced tactical armor and carrying standard-issue M4 carbines. 3 Foundation employees sit at flickering monitors watching a live feed of footage from the containment cell of the infamous SCP-106, or as it's referred to by all staff, the Old Man. No Foundation personnel are permitted to travel within 60 feet of the cell for security reasons, and nobody is permitted to physically interact with the anomaly without the approval of 2/3 of O5 Command. The observer's eyes itch and sting from hours of unending blue light exposure, but they can't look away. The Old Man is crafty. He might have the insatiable bloodlust of a hungry great white shark, but he's not mindless. He's a calculating predator, more sadistic than the worst human serial killer, and he's always searching for the next opportunity. According to the Foundation records, he's been active since at least World War II, and it's estimated that he has hundreds if not thousands of victims to his name, and many of those made simple but extremely foolish mistakes of underestimating him. After all, it only takes a few seconds of inattentiveness and the briefest moment of distraction to give him the window he needs. To do what, you ask? Oh, don't worry, you'll find out, just like they did. The Old Man has his nickname for a reason. Most of the time, he really does look exactly like that, an old man, or more specifically an old man's decaying corpse, his body covered in rotten, dark, grayish-black flesh that looks like putrid meat. Though the creature has been observed being able to change shape, the rot seems to run too deep for the Old Man to ever hide it. Foundation employees that have observed SCP-106 for extended periods of time have reported seeing it assume the form of grinning, decayed children and women whose rotted flesh barely hangs on their creaking bones. Just seeing the images through a video feed is enough to cause a lifetime of insomnia and other sleeping issues. Still, they have a job to do and the cameras remain fixed on the old man. He's been completely motionless for 3 months, just sitting there like a Buddhist monk in deep meditation. A novice might see this period of inactivity as a cause for celebration, but those with experience know that this is merely the calm before the storm. SCP-106 can remain in a dormant state for months at a time. Described by the Foundation scientists as a lulling state, it's believed that the old man is simply waiting for its captors to get soft, make a mistake, or simply have a momentary lapse in concentration, which is all it needs to make its move. It had happened so many times before, and it was about to happen again. One of the observers must have felt an overwhelming wave of anxiety as he saw the creature ever so slightly twitch. Just a tiny quiver in the shoulder muscles, but that was enough to tell the observer that their day had just taken a terrifying turn. He grabbed the emergency phone fixed to his desk and practically screamed into the receiver that 106 is moving, that they need a tactical team stat. But it was already too late. He and the other 2 observers stared into the monitors with their mouths agape as a gooey, rust-like substance began to pool around the creature on the floor of its cell. Slowly, the creature craned its withered neck around. Its face was fixed into a broad, yellow-toothed, lipless grin. Its eyes had the kind of dull, flat malice of an underwater predator. It looked directly into the camera, directly at them, and smiled. The observers knew this was bad. Really, really bad. With what they could have sworn was a little nod, the old man began sinking into the rusty puddle it made on the ground beneath it, until it had disappeared entirely. SCP-106 is capable of phasing through any solid surface with ease, making it one of the hardest entities to reliably contain, and earning it a spot on the dreaded Keter class, reserved for the anomalies that are complete nightmares to keep locked up. Through the years of costly research and deadly trial and error, the Foundation would later devise ways of at least slowing the creature down. It's shown to have an aversion to lead, highly complex or random physical structures, and intense bright light. None of these cause harm to the creature, as far as we know, literally nothing can, but they'll at least buy you some precious extra seconds with which to at least try and escape. Seconds the 3 observers didn't have. One of them grabbed an emergency line again and barked into it that they had lost visual on the anomaly. Just then, the observers heard a faint, crackling sound behind them and the hissing of a chemical burn. They turned in horror to see a huge rusty burn mark expanding across the wall, right next to the door, which was their only escape route. They backed as far away from the door as they could as a rotten hand began reaching out of the mass of corrosive black sludge, followed by the grinning face of SCP-106, ready to have some fun. Meanwhile, 2 heavily armed security officers, Agents Goodwin and Resnick, came charging down the corridor toward the observation rooms. It became a bleak slogan during SCP-106 escape attempts that all you need to do is follow the screams, and that motto was proven true that night, because awful things were happening to the observation personnel. They were certainly screaming about it. Of course, even with the top-of-the-line firearms, there was little they could do to harm the rampaging old man. He seemed immune to all forms of physical damage. All they could hope to do was keep the thing distracted until the scientists and containment specialists finished the preparations to lure him back into his containment cell. Goodwin surged forward while Resnick covered his 6. Vigilance was key, as unlike a standard human combatant, SCP-106 could attack from literally any angle, including above or below. Physical obstacles were irrelevant to him, and no cover was safe. The hardened security officers could see the burn mark on the wall of the observation room as they approached. SCP-106 was perpetually coated in a thick black mucus with powerful corrosive properties that left any surfaces it touched permanently marred. Foundation scientists speculated that this mucus served as a kind of pre-digestive substance that tenderizes meat and bone alike, but to what purpose this serves is a mystery, as the old man has never been observed eating. It's postulated that the only purpose is causing additional pain. Goodwin and Resnick knew to treat this hissing sludge as a potential threat, as the corrosive properties would remain active for as much as 6 hours before finally fizzling out. The 2 officers shared a quiet nod before Goodwin breached the observation room door with a hard kick. The 2 of them surged inside, guns at the ready. In their time working at the Foundation, they'd seen some truly horrific sights. From the mutilation of D-Class personnel, typically death row prison inmates brought in for use as SCP guinea pigs, to the violence and mayhem of a containment breach. But there was nothing in their past that would ever make the horrifying sight they saw in the observation room that night feel normal. All 3 observers were dead. Almost nothing remained of 2 of them, and the third, while still intact, no longer looked human. He looked like he'd somehow been dead 100 years in the brief period that the old man had been free. His skin was gray and completely dried out, and his mouth was locked into a perpetual scream. It was a massacre, but there was no sign of the old man. Goodwin grabbed his radio and whispered, "This is Goodwin in Observation Room 6, requesting immediate backup. We have no idea where this thing," but his sentence was cut off by a sudden scream from Agent Resnick. SCP Foundation security officers are as tough as nails, the best of the best, you might say, recruited from the top military organizations in the world. So hearing one of them scream in fright is a rare, if not impossible, occurrence. But even they were forced to yell out in fear when they looked up to see the old man standing on the ceiling, grinning down at them. Resnick raised his M4 and shot a 3-round burst at center mass. SCP-106 didn't care. Even under sustained gunfire from the 2 security officers, it didn't flinch. The old man simply reached down and snatched Agent Resnick from the ground like it was picking an apple from a tree. The old man held Resnick in one hand and pounded its other rotten fist into the agent's body, breaking all of his bones. Resnick screamed for his partner to help him, but there was no time. Before Goodwin could do anything, SCP-106 began receding back into another slimy burn mark on the wall. Only this time, he was taking his screaming victim with him. Agent Resnick gave one more horrified scream before he was pulled backward into the inky darkness, leaving the room silent except for the burning hiss of the corrosive goo left behind. You might think this would be the end of it, but no. For poor Agent Resnick, the worst was yet to come. He was being dragged into what the SCP Foundation scientists refer to as the Old Man's Pocket Dimension, a miniature layer of reality within our own where the malicious SCP is essentially a cruel, all-powerful god. According to witness reports extracted from victims who were taken to this little nightmare realm, the dimension resembles a series of twisting, endless corridors where the old man stalks and tortures his captured victims to the breaking point, manipulating space and time to his own sadistic ends. On rare occasions, the SCP will even release its victims just for the joy of hunting, capturing, and torturing them all over again. While Agent Resnick was learning the true meaning of terror, containment specialists were mobilizing in its cell, preparing the one known, tried and true method of luring the old man back, tempting it with the prospect of causing even more suffering. In order to do this, Foundation personnel take one of the aforementioned Class D personnel and begin inducing extreme pain by breaking a major bone or slicing a tendon every 20 minutes. The victim's agonizing screams are then played over the facility's intercom, acting as bait for the pain-loving old man. The screams echo through the facility's otherwise silent halls as the mutilated corpse of Agent Resnick falls from a new scorch mark on the ceiling. The old man can hear the sounds of suffering ringing out through the air around him, and he can barely contain his excitement over the prospect of a new plaything. The snapped femurs, the torn Achilles tendons, it was all too good to miss. Having had its twisted fun with the security officers and observers, SCP-106 wandered back to its containment cell, where a new screaming victim awaited. The other security officers, containment specialists, and scientists evacuated the area, leaving the old man alone with his prey. While the unfortunate Class D was left to his fate, the rest of the staff commenced cleanup procedures, which mainly involve wiping the brown and black mucus from the walls. It would probably be at least another month before anything like this happened again, and new personnel would be transferred over to the facility to replace the fallen. All in all, just another night at the SCP Foundation.
Mobile Task Force Edna-84, also known by the codename and thus upon his Crucible, is on one of the strangest missions they've ever been sent on. They sit in a darkened room, beads of sweat trickling down their brows. The lights of computer monitors shine upon their faces. They're tackling a monster that, if it escapes, will literally devour all of creation. It has no fear, it has no remorse, and if it isn't kept contained by Edna-84, it may escape and wreak havoc across the world. Oh, and did we mention it's trapped in a Minecraft server? You heard us right. SCP-4335 is a cognito-hazardous extra-dimensional being of pure terror, trapped inside a procedurally generated world in the immensely popular game Minecraft. You hear about a lot of horrifying monsters being described as Lovecraftian, but only this monster is Minecraftian. There's a lot that needs explaining here, and we intend to get to all of it. But let's start with how the Foundation keeps this truly exceptional beast contained. The Foundation first discovered SCP-4335 back in 2010, shortly after the alpha version of Minecraft was released. Because of the online nature of the game, it's proven to be impossible to contain 4335 externally, seeing as it isn't confined to any one physical location. Shutting off the server 4335 is found in is not an effective containment method either, as this just causes the entity to simply hop to a different server. The Foundation's greatest fear is that 4335 will one day make the leap out of Minecraft and cause chaos in our world. That's why it's imperative to draft containment procedures for SCP-4335 within the game. This led to the creation of a containment site unlike any other. Site M1, the first official Foundation site made entirely out of Minecraft blocks. Everyone who was originally involved in the server has been removed and amnesticized. Since then, elite SCP Foundation containment specialists and gamers have been constructing the perfect prison for SCP-4335. Site M1 is a large stone complex built into the side of a mountain. It has a number of key features, including a supply area filled with materials vital for 4335's continued containment, chests filled with books that contain SCP-4335's containment procedures, a few animal farms for the purpose of breeding and killing livestock for their meat, the entrance to a mine, several chests containing books specifically designed for civilians to learn about 4335 if they ever breach containment and enter the server, and of course, the actual containment chamber for SCP-4335 itself, which is a little more complicated. 4335's containment chamber is built out of several layers, all made from iron blocks. The outermost cube is 75 by 75 by 75 blocks. The inner cube is 55 by 55 by 55 blocks, and the innermost cube is 25 by 25 by 25 blocks, creating several levels of defense. Finally, one layer within all these others, which contains the anomaly proper, is made from obsidian blocks. SCP-4335 is bound into the center of the containment chamber with a complex mechanism. The outermost cube is completely filled with water, and several dispensers capable of rapidly dispensing large amounts of items in a short amount of time line the cube. The cube also contains several mob farms, which are devices that constantly spawn enemies into the chamber that drop loot when they die. The chamber is essentially designed to funnel a constant flow of items inwards to SCP-4335. There are even contingency measures for if SCP-4335 manages to breach containment. If escape is attempted, blocks of TNT detonate above the ceiling, causing lava to pour into the chamber. At that point, MTF Edna 84 are dispatched into the server to lure 4335 back into its containment chamber. To do this, they fire a mix of fire-resistant potions and ender pearls, which have teleportation capabilities. Interestingly, there's one more basic method of luring SCP-4335 back into the obsidian cube: taunting and insulting. One of SCP-4335's many anomalous abilities is being able to hear people through the screen, and being a proud creature, it often responds to insults by charging in to directly engage the insulter. If SCP-4335 still manages to breach the containment that has been set up for it, then they even expect that it will likely soon hop into another server. At that point, the goal will shift to finding the monster and recontaining it. With containment procedures this complex and extensive, it shouldn't come as a surprise that SCP-4335 rests firmly in the Keter class. What exactly is this anomalous entity? Why does its containment hinge on constantly providing it with items? And how did it end up in Mojang's popular building and survival game in the first place? SCP-4335, in terms of physical dimensions, appears almost identical to the player character, with an all-black skin. It also appears to be constantly shrouded in a cloud of smoke particles, and has long black tendrils protruding from its back. In some respects, 4335 has been compared to two popular creepypasta figures, Herobrine and the Slenderman. But 4335 is far stranger. Its physical body behaves similarly to most assets native to the game, with a few peculiar, anomalous abilities we'll discuss soon. Handling SCP-4335 is an extremely delicate process. If command blocks, creative mode, or server commands are ever enabled in a server with SCP-4335, the server will instantly shut down, and SCP-4335 will move to a different server. SCP-4335 also uses its tendrils to destroy surrounding blocks before consuming them. With each successful consumption, SCP-4335 grows, and when it reaches sufficient size, it hops to a different server. As you can see, keeping SCP-4335 contained is an uphill battle. But luckily there are two factors on the Foundation's side here. The first is that SCP-4335 is immobilized while consuming items and blocks, limiting its ability to actively escape Foundation forces. The second factor is that SCP-4335 needs a rest period between consuming blocks in order to grow, meaning if its consumption is constant and continuous, it isn't able to grow. These two factors have informed the entirety of the Foundation's containment procedures around SCP-4335. It's locked into its chamber and fed items and blocks constantly, effectively rooting it in place. When SCP-4335 begins to grow, the Foundation also found that the application of Ender Pearls helps reduce it back to its normal size. However, SCP-4335 does have a method of striking back against its captors. 4335 is a Virgin-class multisensory cognitohazard. Anyone viewing it without proper training and protection may experience distressing hallucinations. SCP-4335 is also capable of telepathic speech, with people playing on its server, and as we alluded to earlier, it can also hear any noises you make while playing. Weird is a term thrown around a lot when it comes to SCPs, considering it's pretty much a requirement for the Foundation to take interest in you. But an all-devouring Minecraft demon that can hear you talking through your screen is strange, even by Foundation standards. MTF Edna84 first discovered SCP-4335 in the single-player server of Minecraft user Leaking Heart. 3 team members, Jason Yelsen, Richard Duchamp, and Sheila Freemason, covertly entered the game to investigate and potentially apprehend the creature. When Leaking Heart first discovered their presence on what he thought was a private server, he quickly left, a little creeped out by the sudden intrusion. Thankfully, the trio was still able to locate SCP-4335. They discovered the creature hiding inside a giant crater, as though it had impacted the Earth at considerable speed. Richard Duchamp, who was the leader of the team at the time, made the mistake of looking directly at the entity. In that moment, he experienced the full force of SCP-4335's cognitohazardous effects. He hallucinated, believing that his keyboard was melting before his eyes. In the aftermath of this incident, Duchamp was taken off the case, and Jason Yelsen was promoted to head of the project. Things were still going to get stranger. Yelsen was able to open a dialogue with the creature after containing it in a chamber filled with lava. It asked him whether it had landed in the right location, meaning our world, and Yelsen informed him that it had somehow fallen into the world of Minecraft instead. The creature was at first confused, and then angry and resentful about its situation. It vowed to find its way into our world somehow and obtain more sustenance. A few months after this, the entity managed to breach containment and hop into another server. Yelsen and 2 others once again managed to track it down and recontain it. But this time, 2 civilians also inhabiting the server were exposed to the anomalous effects of SCP-4335. They weren't hurt, but they did appear strange and incoherent after experiencing 4335's cognitohazards. The Foundation tracked them down in the aftermath and gave them amnestic treatment. 4335 was contained shortly thereafter. Once again, Yelsen came face to face with his new foe. 8 months after being captured, 4335 granted Yelsen another interview from containment. 4335 admitted that it almost respected Yelsen and the rest of the Foundation for figuring out how to capture and contain it so quickly. In exchange, it would give the Foundation something extremely valuable: information. First, it asked one question of Yelsen: how does he define creation? Yelsen replied, something that is built and brought into this universe by a sapient being using other things from this universe. 4335 agreed. It went on to explain that it came from a universe devoid of creation, a dark and unknowable place, filled with nothing but violent random chaos. Its dimension existed directly above ours, and it often looked down at us through a dimensional window, fascinated by all the creation below. It plotted and dreamed to one day infiltrate our reality, and Yelsen finally had the opportunity to ask the magic question, why? Though he wasn't quite ready for the brutal honesty of SCP-4335's reply.
I do not like to lie, so I will tell you now. I wish to suck it dry of the toys of whatever force controls your universe. Destroy the light, destroy the earth, and destroy humanity. It reminded me of me, a blubbering mass of intelligence and order. It sickens me in ways I cannot comprehend. I hope you understand.
SCP-4335 was a connoisseur of creation, and it sought to devour all of it. In this moment, Yeltsin realized what an incredibly dangerous entity he was dealing with. The only mystery was why this creature had somehow landed in Minecraft instead of our world, which appeared to be the only thing that saved us. But Yeltsin didn't have time to think. 4335 was about to stage another daring escape attempt. One of its tendrils reached out and attacked Yeltsin's player character. In that moment, the real-life Yeltsin began to hallucinate and panic. Suddenly back in the game, a series of abnormally tall, slender black figures appeared and began deconstructing the containment chamber around SCP-4335. It had somehow summoned new minions into the game to assist in this containment breach. Jason Yeltsin entered cognito-hazard quarantine following this incident and was removed from the project. And he wasn't the only one affected by this incident. Following the first appearance of these long, dark figures, players across the globe began to experience them appearing in their own games. The Foundation managed to find a solution. They contacted Mojang and had the creatures patched into the game during the next update, as a new non-anomalous entity, which seemed to stop 4335 from being able to use them as its own tools. They're now known as the Endermen, and are beloved among fans for being one of the creepier enemies. To this day, containment efforts continue for SCP-4335, but there's only one question left. Why did the entity fall into Minecraft rather than our world? The file posits the most likely answer, because 4335 defines creation as elements made by sapient beings. In Minecraft, the most popular game in the world at the height of 4335's power, everything that exists is the product of code made by humans. Creation is truly abundant there. As for our world, in SCP-4335's extra-dimensional eyes, there is no creation, no intelligent design, no soothing piano soundtrack, just frightening, chaotic randomness which is too unlike its own dimension. So even if SCP-4335 ever did arrive in our reality, it would likely be disappointed by how little there is to eat. We all have fond memories of the playground. Hours upon hours spent in blissful childhood abandon, racing around the local park, climbing the monkey bars, and seeing if you could get even higher on the swings than your best friend. And then, of course, there's the slide. Who doesn't love a slide? Only you and the force of gravity pulling you down through a straight or spiral tube. Those few seconds of excitement, that rush of not knowing whether you'll come out the other end of the slide or not, that's enough of a thrill for any kid. Of course, you would always come tumbling out of the mouth of the slide every time, at worst with an odd but innocent friction burn on your leg or arm. But what if, one day, you didn't come out of the other end? Or worse, what if the place at the end of the slide wasn't the world you left behind when you slid through the entrance? It doesn't seem all that likely to happen, right? Well, you've obviously never taken a trip down SCP-1562, better known as the Tunnel Slide. As its moniker suggests, SCP-1562 is a slide, or it at least appears to be an ordinary tunnel slide. You know, the kind that you would easily find at any kid's park, jungle gym, or indoor play area. Just over 2 meters high and almost 3.5 meters long. And for the most part, it is a completely normal slide. If you were to just sit in it and glide down it feet first, nothing would happen. Then again, if SCP-1562 was an ordinary everyday piece of a playground, then the SCP Foundation would not have such a vested interest in it. They definitely wouldn't be keeping it locked up in quarantine, secured in Testing Lab 46-V of Site-24. And if any Foundation agents ask, you didn't hear that from us, by the way. The door to the lab is kept locked at all times. No member of personnel is even allowed near the slide unless granted special clearance to do so by Foundation researcher Dr. Carver. So what is it that makes this thing so special? Well, for one, SCP-1562 was first recovered by the Foundation from a defunct, abandoned playground. The location of this playground has been redacted, but it was known to be on the outskirts of a town where a number of young children had been reported missing. Does SCP-1562 contain some sort of clue as to where these children were taken? Perhaps some piece of forensic evidence left behind by a child-snatching anomaly from another dimension? Not quite. SCP-1562 is the thing that took those children. You see, the slide's anomalous properties require very specific circumstances in order to activate. Like we mentioned earlier, if you were just sitting on your butt while you were sliding down it, you would escape unscathed. Laying flat on your back? That is also a safe option. Even flailing yourself about, spinning and rolling and waving your arms, changing position on the way down would mean that nothing anomalous would appear to happen. However, if someone enters SCP-1562 and travels down in head first, laying on their stomach with their arms tucked at their side, almost in a plank position, then that is when strange things start to happen. That is when a person finds out what happened to those missing children. Only about 15 centimeters from the opening of the slide, a person sliding down on their front, head first, with arms by their sides will disappear right before exiting SCP-1562. In an instant, they will simply be gone. No longer in the slide or even relocated to anywhere nearby. To make matters worse, every single person that this has happened to has never been found again. They literally have vanished off the face of the earth. Unfortunately, there isn't much that can be done to prevent this. During testing, the Foundation quickly learned that tethering a safety line to a subject does little to stop them from disappearing. They cannot be pulled back from wherever it is that the slide sends them. The rope they are attached to is simply cut and goes slack from the moment that a person is taken by the slide. Now that sounds like the whole story, right? Children are going missing and the Foundation learns it's because of SCP-1562, some kind of interdimensional portal within a playground slide. So they acquire the slide, take it away and keep it locked up securely where it can't cause any more disappearances. End of story. Except that's not quite the end. No. The one thing it's still possible to do once someone has disappeared down the slide is to stay in contact with them. The SCP Foundation has expended a number of test subjects by sending them sliding down SCP-1562 just to learn what's on the other side. Just where does the slide take them? Luckily, tests like this are precisely what the Foundation has D-Class personnel for. So what happened when the Foundation sent some D-Classes on a one-way joyride down the slide? Well, one test involved a D-Class designated D-2445, who disappeared into SCP-1562 but was given a two-way radio to communicate directly with Dr. Darretts, one of the research staff. D-2445 reported that he felt himself in a small, cramped tunnel and quickly requested to be let back out. Dr. Darretts had neglected to tell D-2445 that was impossible, and that no one ever came back from inside the slide. While it was too dark to see anything, the prisoner described still being laid on his front, but feeling like there were rocks or dirt surrounding him on all sides. Realizing that he barely had enough room to move or even lift his head, D-2445 again requested to be let out of SCP-1562. As the unfortunate D-Class grew increasingly more unsettled by the movement-restricting environment, Dr. Darretts revealed that the lifeline tethering D-2445 back to the Foundation had been severed upon their disappearance into the slide. Panicking, D-2445 managed to move forward slightly and realized that his head had hit something. A shoe. A tiny child's shoe. Communication with D-2445 was called to a halt, and the Foundation's researchers discussed possible ways that they could retrieve the prisoner. Although most of them probably knew at this point that this task was likely impossible, this test may have taken place before the Foundation realized that return from SCP-1562 was impossible. The plan was that another D-Class would be sent into the slide. Once again, they would be attached to a tether line and be carrying video and audio recording equipment, along with a GPS tracker and a headlamp. Reaching out to D-2445, Dr. Deritz relayed this plan to him. D-2445 immediately begged to be set free from SCP-1562, as the doctor attempted to calm him down, but to little effect. Something had scared him, truly terrified him. A sound coming from somewhere within the tunnel. It started talking, D-2445 claimed. When Dr. Deritz asked for clarity, the D-Class replied saying that a little boy had tried to speak to him, but that the child had made little sense. He just kept asking where he was, and I told him I didn't know, but I don't think he was really talking to me, because he didn't respond to my voice, and he told me to stop crying when I was actually sort of calm. When asked if this child had moved at all, D-2445 said that he was unsure. He started screaming and I told him to shut up, but he just kept screaming and crying and asking for his mommy. And then he finally stopped, and shortly after that, you contacted me again. Please get me out now. Dr. Deritz tried to reassure the man, to little avail, and communication with D-2445 was cut off after he claimed something was wrong with his chest. Shortly after the Foundation lost communication with D-2445, another member of D-Class was sent into the slide after him. This subject, referred to officially as D-8600, had been specifically selected for this task thanks to his small stature. Dr. Deritz and the other Foundation researchers testing SCP-1562 believed that the man's thinner body type would allow D-8600 to better navigate the tunnel that the slides seemed to transport people to. And you can probably guess what happened next. Just like all the others that had been sent down the slide, D-8600 was trapped. His lifeline was cut the moment that he vanished inside the tunnel slide. On top of this, the GPS tracker that this thinner D-Class had been issued with seemed to not be working properly. Its signal could not be correctly traced, and without an accurate fix, there was no way to determine the location to which SCP-1562 was transporting its victims, if it was even in this universe. Additionally, the video feed from the camera D-8600 was carrying also failed to connect, with only audio from his radio being recovered by the research team. Contacting D-8600, Dr. Deritz was informed by this new D-Class that his headlamp had stopped working the second he had arrived in the same cave or tunnel as earlier test subjects. Before long, by shimmying through the area on his arms, D-8600 bumped into a foot, believed to be belonging to D-2445. While he could barely see anything, D-8600 could hear D-2445's voice, and this was being faintly picked up via his radio. However, as he and Dr. Deritz tried to talk to the first prisoner, his words began to sound all too familiar. I don't know, some sort of very small tunnel. It's really cramped. Can you get me out now? Followed by, no, it's too dark, I can't see anything, and I'm stuck. It was all just a recording from what D-2445 had said when he first arrived after SCP-1562 had sent him into the tunnel. D-8600 did not realize this at first and attempted to help his fellow prisoner, hoping to pull him out of wherever they were trapped. Dr. Deritz tried desperately to explain that D-2445 was just repeating his half of an earlier conversation, but D-8600 hardly noticed that was the case. He gripped the other D-Class's ankles and told the doctor to pull them out of the tunnel. The doctor revealed that once again the tether line had been severed, but D-8600 refused to believe that escape was impossible. He tried to worm his way back the way he had come, leaving D-2445 still repeating his words from earlier. He just kept asking me where he was, and I told him I didn't know. But I don't think he was really talking to me because he didn't respond to my voice, and he told me to stop crying when I was actually sort of calm. I don't think so. He started screaming and I told him to shut up, but he kept just screaming and crying and asking for his mommy. Then he finally stopped, and shortly after that you contacted me again. Please get me out now. Please hurry, my chest is really starting to hurt. After yelling at him to stop talking multiple times, D-8600 noted that D-2445 had finally gone quiet. The D-Class also remarked that the air was starting to taste stale, and hoped that there would be enough oxygen for him to get back. Then, just like his predecessor, communication with D-8600 came to an abrupt stop. Dr. Deritz was no longer able to reach him on the radio. There was nothing but static. The Foundation was unable to re-establish contact with either of the two D-Class personnel lost inside SCP-1562. and any future testing of the tunnel slide was suspended. To this day, none of us know what exactly happened to the victims of the tunnel slide. Where were they taken? What had taken them? What was making the prior victims repeat their ominous words? As horror author Stephen King once put it, it's the unanswered questions that stays with us the longest. But the next time you decide to thrill your inner child by taking a jaunt to your local kiddie park, you may just find out for yourself.
40 years ago, a U.S. Navy exploratory vessel landed on a chain of islands in the South Atlantic, just 2,000 miles off the coast of Argentina. In other words, the middle of nowhere. Yet on this far-off set of rocks afloat in the middle of the ocean, they discovered a vast array of strange wildlife and plant species that resemble little of what they left behind on the mainland. Could this be a treasure trove of undiscovered species, they wondered? Hoping to capitalize on the discovery, a reconnaissance team of researchers was sent out to explore some of the islands on foot, and what they found did not disappoint. From endangered species of birds to plant life and vegetation that looked like it belonged on Mars, they found a dizzying array of new and exciting examples of evolutionary oddities that would fill a library. But unfortunately, their jubilation was cut short. Attempting to collect soil samples, they dug into the ground and soon discovered that what they were standing on wasn't actually ground at all. The Navy scientists soon discovered the rocky terrain they were exploring was actually made up entirely of organic matter. As per the standard protocol, the SCP Foundation was forced to silence the U.S. Navy research vessel after its discovery. With the okay from the U.S. government, the ship was torpedoed and sunk to the bottom of the ocean with all hands on deck, in the name of protecting the greater good of the masses. A tragedy at sea for the sake of preventing worldwide pandemonium. From there, the Foundation took over with the containment procedures of what would eventually come to be known as SCP-169, better known by its nickname, the Leviathan. The Leviathan is a biblical creature of mythical proportions, said to be able to boil the seas and create earth-ending floods with just a whip of its massive continent-spanning body. It is unclear if SCP-169 has the ability to do these things, though, given its massive size, which Foundation researchers estimate to be somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000 kilometers. It's easy to see how something that big moving at any speed could be devastating for the coastal regions of the world. Although we use the word contain, it is impossible for SCP staff to ever contain something of such massive size. Surveillance and monitoring are about all we can do for now. That and hope it never wakes up and decides that we're on the menu. It was thought to be relatively smooth sailing, until one incident changed everything. Dr. Hart turned off the video monitor and faced the assembled members of MTF Gamma-6, also known as the Deep Feeders, renowned for their specialization in the tracking of deep-sea and oceanic anomalies. The room was dark, and each team member was sitting in shadow, but still Dr. Hart could see the seriousness on their faces. "I'm sure you're wondering why I called you here at such short notice," he said. On the screen behind him, he put up a NASA satellite picture of a small set of rocky islands. "You see this little island chain here? Well, it wasn't there a week ago." He paused, rubbing his forehead from lack of sleep. "At 8:05 a.m. today, we recorded another auditory anomaly emitting from SCP-169. This one was much louder and longer than the one recorded in 1997 by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the one known as the Bloop. Back then, it was easy to brush off as some ice breaking off of a continental shelf and scraping against the seafloor. It's not so easy to cover up anymore. These auditory emissions from SCP-169 are beginning to grow more frequent. More than that, increased seismic activity around the archipelago on the creature's back indicates that the rate at which the creature is breathing is also up. Typically, the rate at which the creature takes what we are assuming to be a breath is once every 3 months. The rate has increased to once every 3 weeks. For as long as we've been monitoring SCP-169, it's been adrift along the southern Atlantic, never moving more than a kilometer a week. That behavior is slowly beginning to change. It doesn't sound like much, but something that big even moving just a fraction of that faster means 100-foot tidal waves for the entire South American coastline. We fear the creature is showing signs of waking up. If this is true, it could mean a cataclysm for the hundreds of nations around the world. Millions, hell, even billions could be wiped off the face of the earth if this thing just flips its body too fast in the wrong direction. To put it to scale, this monster is about the size of the Caribbean. Maybe even bigger as far as we know. The doctor then pulled out a decanter of whiskey and poured himself a glass, swallowing the entire pour in one go, in an appalling breach of workplace professionalism. Seriously, an XK class end of the world scenario is still no excuse for drinking on the job. We're talking about an extinction level event. A bona fide XK class end of the world scenario. 1,000-foot tsunami waves stretching as far as the eye can see from either end of the horizon. The last time SCP-169 stirred, it created the Mediterranean. In fact, the legends of the biblical flood, Noah's Ark, the same story, can be found in every civilization and culture around the world. So maybe they were onto something. It is to this end I call you all here. To save the world from the next great flood. He paused for a moment as the room took in the gravity of the situation. The more we can learn about SCP-169, the better. And right now, we know squat. For one, we've never seen just how deep the body of the creature goes, or what's under it. The pressure has been too great for our current model submarines, until now. After reinforcing our Nemo 1 deep-sea submersible with thaumaturgical runes, the integrity of its hull has increased exponentially. Your mission will be to travel as far down and as close to the creature as possible. If it breathes, then there must be gills or lungs. There must be some basic biological facts we need to understand if we're going to survive extinction. Our only recourse is to find a way to sedate the creature, and if that doesn't work, then God help us all. Just 12 hours later, deep in the waters of the southern Atlantic, a massive submersible ship was diving down into the depths of the deep ocean, looking for a way to stop the end of the world. Agent Just 6-1, a member of Deep Feeders, looked out of the massive viewing port as the ship slowly descended alongside the rocky trench that made up the body of SCP-169. Behind him was Dr. Hart, sporting a white 5 o'clock shadow and a red nose from a night of drinking to calm his nerves. The entire crew were silent in awe as the giant floodlights of the ship brushed over the barnacle-covered surfaces of the undersea mountain. They progressed slowly, breaching each milestone in depth with caution, knowing that one wrong move could destabilize the pressure in their ship. Just 6-1 murmured the word, "Scales." "What?" asked Dr. Hart. "I've been watching the patterns of the ridges as we sink down. They look like scales. Giant segments. It's hard to see at first because they're so covered in barnacles and sediment, but I'm sure of it. They're giant, armored scales, the way lobsters or crabs have armored exoskeletons." "Interesting," the doctor said, scratching his chin. "Arthropods have segmented armored bodies. This means we might be looking at some sort of evolutionary hybrid, some sort of aquatic mammal such as a whale or dolphin, but one that has developed armored segmented scales similar to that of a crustacean." The doctor crossed his arms to think. "The closest thing we have on the fossil record of this magnitude is an armored fish from the Cretaceous period, but even that's way too small to compare to this. This thing has an entire ecosystem on its back." "How old is it?" asked the agent. "Well, now that you mention it, given the impossible age of the creature, an arthropod would make sense. Lobsters and other crustaceans don't age conventionally, you see. They are effectively immortal. In fact, they actually die because they continue to grow until their bodies can't hold up their humongous size anymore. And yet, SCP-169 just kept growing." The doctor trailed off, thinking to himself. Dr. Hart, still lost in thought, turned to walk to the back of the submersible as Just 6-1 followed. He said as much to himself as to the agent, "The creature is old. The geological survey conducted when SCP-169 was first discovered carbon-dated the specimen to over 541 million years old. As you can probably surmise, that's too old for any living being. The results had to be incorrect, and yet I checked them myself more than once. And numbers do not lie. The entity predates our civilization. Hell, it predates complex life forms on this planet as we know it. From an evolutionary standpoint, it doesn't make any sense." The agent, confused, asked, "Doctor, how could something so big even come into existence?" "Very little of our planet is actually landmass. It's a wonder we call it Earth. Most of this planet is water. We aren't looking at a creature that's on our planet, Agent. We are on its planet."
Just then a flurry of alarms and sensors began to go off at the bridge of the ship. The team scrambled to their stations, checking off monitors and shouting readings to each other. The ship's thermal sensors are detecting a massive rise in temperature, transmitting power to cooling systems. We have activity northwest of our location. Sonar has something big headed our way. We need to dive now! The ship lurched forward, nose first, as everyone on board held on to their seats, the restraints keeping them from falling forward. Just outside of the viewing port, Dr. Hart could see an enormous scaled appendage moving fast in their location. We need to steer the ship clear of the Talons. Revert all power to the thrusters. Get us out of the way, the doctor yelled. Don't you think I'm doing that? The captain shouted back. The ship jolted sideways and downwards as an immense wave of pressure came over the submersible, putting 6 Gs of force on its occupants. Juz 6-1 yelped out of fear as the ship came close to crashing into what appeared to be the edge of a titanic talon, the size of the Empire State Building. Following the encounter, the part of the ship bordering the reinforced glass of the viewing port began to glow bright red. It's boiling the water around us! One of the crew members cried out. It's not boiling anything, it's just cavitation due to the pressure reduction in the water. The updated runes on the ship's hull should keep us safe, we just need to cool our heads. Stay focused on the mission, bottom feeders. After several moments of holding their breaths, the crew of Nemo 1 began to relax as their pace returned to a slow descent along the side of the underwater behemoth. Before long, the vessel was no longer traveling straight down, but starting to curve under the creature, traveling north towards the theoretical head of SCP-169. After several hours, the ship came upon giant fissures in the rocky exterior of the creature. These massive vent-like structures appeared stiff, but slowly they opened and closed over the span of weeks. These were the respiratory organs of the organism. Clocking it at over 2 miles underneath the surface of the ocean, the crew carefully began entering the smaller pod-like submersibles that detached from the main ship. Juz 6-1 entered his pod and strapped on the haptic gloves that would give him control of the pod's robotic arms. He and a team of 3 other volunteers had agreed to undergo the dangerous mission of attaching artificial chemical emission machines that could be programmed to release anesthetic gas into SCP-169's respiratory system on command remotely. The emission machines could be refueled manually whenever the contents ran out. It was an ingenious solution Dr. Hart came up with when thinking of his time studying sharks as a marine biologist. They would tag the fins of sharks by capturing them and bringing the specimens on the deck of their boat. From there, the scientists would drill a radio frequency emitter onto the fin of the shark. When he had first seen this practice as a young college student, Dr. Hart was afraid the process was harming the shark, but later he learned it was designed in a way to not be harmful to the specimen, and eventually the tag would fall off after enough data on the shark's movement was collected. Except these tags would not be falling off, he thought. They could not. For the sake of all mankind, this had to work. The doctor pressed a button on the receiver of the radio and spoke. Juz 6-1, what's your status? Pressure's holding, all signs look good. Juz 6-2, pressure's holding, all good. Juz 6-3, all clear, Captain. Juz 6-4, there was silence. Juz 6-4, do you copy? All clear, Doc, sorry, my mic was muted. En route and ready to do this thing. Dr. Hart sighed in relief and slowly reclined in his chair, watching the pods move closer to the large openings on SCP-169's side. One by one, the robotic arms used underwater torches to drill into the thick, rock-like exoskeleton of the creature, screwing in complex million-dollar equipment that was both waterproof and could withstand the immense pressure at such a depth under the ocean. As the minutes turned to hours, Dr. Hart couldn't help but feel anxiety for the safety of his crew and the success of the mission. But before long, the pods began to return one by one to the mothercraft, each completing the segment of work with which they were tasked. The last pod still working was Juz 6-1, whose robotic arm was in the process of rotating a large industrial-sized screw. Juz 6-1 had all but finished when suddenly a low rumble could be felt shaking the larger submersible. Dr. Hart's voice came crackling over the radio. Get back to the ship now! Juz 6-1, wrapped in deep focus on his task, replied, I'm just about finished, just packing up my tool belt. Leave it. Return to the ship now. That's an order. Jesus, what's wrong? It's not like this is the end of the world, said the agent, chuckling over his radio. An ear-piercing echo sent shockwaves through the depths of the ocean around the submersible. The waves rumbled with the sound of SCP-169's voice, similar to the sound of a large whale. but amplified by a million. The sound sent all the crew members falling to the floor as the ship experienced severe damage from the burst of pressure, slightly cracking the glass viewport and sending smoke flooding into the small bridge of the ship. "Gas masks!" shouted Dr. Hart as they all donned breathing apparatus. "SCP-169 is waking up. Begin activation of the chemical emission machines. We need to sedate it now. The Leviathan is waking up. We need to stop it," shouted Dr. Hart. Just then, he looked back and noticed JUS 6-1's pod was gone. "JUS 6-1, what's your position? JUS 6-1, where are you?" "Sir, sonar has him drifting off deeper into the ocean behind us. He must have gotten knocked off SCP-169 by the shockwave." But Dr. Hart wouldn't have it. He didn't want any more blood on his hands. "Reverse thrusters, turn us around and get to him. We're not losing anyone." "But the breach in the hull!" "It'll hold. That's what the runes are for." The outside of the submersible began to glow a slight blue as the ship's system started to come back online to full capacity, and alarm systems started to turn off and report normal pressure readings. Before long, the Nemo-1 had caught up to JUS 6-1's pod and retrieved the agent, who had been knocked unconscious by the shockwave. Once the agent was back on the main ship, the doctor turned his attention back to the monitors, making sure the installations they drilled into the creature were functional. Slowly, the machines came online to full power, and the speed at which SCP-169 had been moving began to slow ever so slightly. The team all watched the viewport in silence as a steady stream of anesthetic gas was pumped into the respiratory system of the gigantic living myth in front of them. After a few moments of waiting, the doctor spoke. "I think it worked," he said with a smile. The crew erupted in cheers as they radioed control back up on land that the mission had been a success. The message quickly reached the O5 Council, where a red alert status was de-escalated, and the O5 members withdrew from their plan of leaving the current Earth for that of an alternate universe. The whole crew began to sing and celebrate the prevention of the end of the world, as Dr. Hart simply stood in front of the massive viewport, watching the mountainous specimen slowly grow smaller in the distance as the submersible began ascending back to the world above. JUS 6-1 came over to congratulate him, patting him on the back. "We did it," he said. "Loosen up." The doctor managed to laugh along in acknowledgement. "That we did," he said in relief. "That we did." The two watched the deep blue ocean in silence, taking in the vastness of the sea. Perhaps this would not be the end of it, but that day, they had done what the SCP Foundation did best: kick that apocalyptic can a few miles down the road. And sometimes, in the face of the terrifying and the infinite, that's really the best you can do. The calm before the storm. As a metaphor, it normally means a lull that occurs just before a huge and often catastrophic event takes place. However, there is such a thing as a literal calm before a storm. The saying comes from a weather phenomenon where a tranquil period of stillness and serenity takes place, only for the winds to start picking up, the rain to start falling, and the storm to suddenly begin to hammer down. Nobody likes being caught outside when a thunderstorm rolls into town, but thunder isn't always the worst part of a storm. That sudden and unsettling flash of lightning that unpredictably cracks across a dark sky. The electricity, erratic and volatile in behavior, might just be the part that startles you into wishing, hoping, praying to return to the calm before the storm. SCP-938 is an entity composed of sheer electrical energy. Forget the notion of a simple dynamic current with an unassuming physical form, and imagine more. A creature composed of pure, relentless electricity. Far from just a benign and passive phenomenon, SCP-938 is considered a formidable and menacing predator by the SCP Foundation. What kind of prey could a being made out of electricity be interested in hunting? Well, that's easy. Power grids. During moderate electrical storms, SCP-938 will appear traveling through the static electricity carried by such storms. Lightning strikes are a form of static electricity, and when they are expelled, SCP-938 uses these strikes to attack its prey. So picture it, a stormy night, the rumble of thunder overhead. Every booming sound is accompanied by a bright flash, maybe even a forked spike of lightning that appears for a brief second. And carried within that lightning is SCP-938, hurtling through the sky towards its target. the nearest electrical grid. Now at this time, it is unknown whether or not SCP-938 actually actively causes electrical storms to occur. Research into the weather patterns in the areas the entity has appeared has proven inconclusive, and there is no proof that this power-based predator is able to influence the weather. However, the second that SCP-938 as a lightning strike makes contact with the nearest power grid, the surrounding area normally suffers a complete loss of all power. Street lamps will go out, plunging the entire city or town into total darkness. This doesn't last forever though, as you might expect. You see, this creature has the potential energy of a storm, much like the ones it uses to travel. SCP-938 isn't out to absorb more energy from national or local power grids, or at least certainly not all at once. What the entity actually does is the following. After a brief loss of power, SCP-938 will quietly infiltrate an electrical grid that provides energy to a town, city, state, or even an entire country. From within, the entity then chooses a structure seemingly at random to monitor. These are usually occupied buildings like homes, offices, or apartment complexes, with plenty of people inside. And no, it doesn't then delight in turning on its charge and frying all those inhabitants, transforming the building into a giant bug zapper. But the more people in the structure, the more electrical appliances and devices you're likely to find inside. SCP-938 stays dormant for a while, hiding out in the power grid, and is usually only detectable by special equipment designed to monitor electromagnetic fields. However, the next time a storm comes a-rolling into town, the living electrical energy wakes up and begins to cause havoc. The easiest to spot indicator of this is that SCP-938 will normally begin interfering with any electrical devices in the structure it has chosen. Its goal is to cause enough disruption that it draws the attention of the inhabitants living there. People inside the building will quickly realize that their appliances aren't working as they should be, sparking and malfunctioning to an alarming degree. These devices will then even cause severe electrocutions to any who come into direct physical contact with them. In every case, this increased electrical activity has caused the neural impulses of anyone in the chosen building to be shut down, resulting in death. There are only 2 instances where this didn't happen. In 1987, during an incursion with SCP-938, 2 victims had their hearts stopped after being electrocuted by devices affected by the entity. Fortunately, these 2 individuals survived after being successfully resuscitated but suffered long-term psychological damage as a result of the incident. Both were noted to have lost significant portions of their memories, and even had their mannerisms and personalities dramatically altered. After a storm, SCP-938 will return to the atmosphere, once again in the form of a lightning strike, and free from the power grid it was previously hiding in. From that point, the entity will aim to repeat the process all over again in a new location, fixating on a new building and claiming the lives of more innocent civilians. However, this is not a set-in-stone pattern of behavior for SCP-938. Analysis of the electromagnetic field readings taken in the creature's vicinity show that it is at least somewhat capable of the same level of conscious thought as most human beings, displaying similar electrical fluctuations to the neural activity of a human brain. Perhaps it is through this disembodied capacity for thought that SCP-938 occasionally chooses a specific person to pursue. Although it is unclear what criteria the electrical entity looks for in a target, the creature has been known to fixate on a single individual and track them for an extended period of time. In one instance, SCP-938 pursued a target for 36 years, 11 months, and 6 days, until that person died of natural causes. These targets, designated as SCP-938-A, will experience symptoms similar to those suffered by individuals suffering from various stress or paranoia-related psychological disorders. This includes the rapid onset of conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder and paranoid schizophrenia. SCP-938-A instances will also quickly develop severe phobias, even if they have never exhibited these previously. However, these aren't what SCP-938 looks for in a victim. Instead, these disorders and conditions seem to be directly caused by the influence of the entity itself. But the side effects of being in the vicinity of SCP-938 don't stop there. In fact, some of the SCP Foundation's own personnel have been affected. According to several members of Theta 9, a mobile task force codenamed Bad Moon Rising. Being close enough to the entity can trigger subtle yet unsettling hallucinations. The most common of these is the sight of a cluster of eyes that glow with iridescent colors, meaning that they appear to change shade when viewed from a different angle, reportedly appearing in poorly lit areas. These eyes seem to watch a person that is suffering from this hallucination. The iridescent eyes have been seen in the shadows of other people as well as appearing in dense foliage like brushes or hedgerows. Even after the Foundation was able to successfully contain SCP-938, staff reported that these hallucinations still continued to persist. But while on the topic of containment, you're probably wondering, how does the SCP Foundation manage to keep a being of pure electricity secure? Well, with great difficulty is the short answer. They actually spent almost half a century trying to contain SCP-938. Why did it take them so long? In part, that was down to the wildly unpredictable nature of SCP-938 and how it moves using electrical storms. Sure, predicting exactly where and when a storm is going to hit isn't impossible, just tricky to achieve with pinpoint accuracy, especially if you're deciding in advance which day to go to the beach or have a picnic in the park. But even if you knew beforehand that a storm was on its way to an area, there is no indicator that SCP-938 would be coming with it. There's squirrely little anomalies like that. Another factor preventing the Foundation from containing SCP-938 was a simple case of poor timing. When they first encountered the entity, it was still 1943, a time when they didn't even have close to the sufficient technological advancement required to track and contain the creature. The entity was, after all, made from a tremendous amount of electrical energy, more than could be safely stored in any one device or location with the tech available in 1943. All the Foundation could hope to do was mitigate the threat that SCP-938 posed, focused on trying to predict its movements and behavior. For a while, containment just seemed like it wasn't an option. 6 years later, the first instance of SCP-938-A appeared. This was the person that we mentioned earlier, who the electric energy entity followed for almost 37 years. In this case, the Foundation security personnel were able to get to SCP-938-A first, and kept them out of the grasp of the predatory power-based creature. These security forces soon became part of Mobile Task Force Theta-9, and they took charge of ensuring SCP-938-A remained safe. And for a while, they achieved this, until the target died of a heart attack in 1986. You already know that part, but what you don't know is that 10 minutes before the target's death, an ambulance arrived at the Foundation's safe house. No member of Bad Moon Rising had called the emergency services, and the local dispatch center hadn't even received a call for assistance to that safe house. The emergency dispatcher on duty that night had spotted an unanswered request for an ambulance on his computer terminal. It's almost as if something had interfered with the machine in order to lure the ambulance into responding to SCP-938-A. This is what prompted the Foundation to once again consider the possibility of containing SCP-938. They knew it would be an expensive endeavor. This was 1986 after all. But as soon as a possible new SCP-938-A target had been identified, the Foundation had the perfect bait to catch the creature that had eluded them since the 1940s, luring it in with its new target. SCP-938 was successfully captured and contained within a capacitor bank at a Foundation research site. A capacitor bank is a series of electrical capacitors, joined and kept in parallel with each other for the purposes of storing electricity. Think of it as a big battery, except there is a key difference between the two. While batteries store electrical energy as some form of chemical energy like lithium, a capacitor is, in basic terms, designed to store pure electrical energy, exactly like what SCP-938 is made from. Containment wasn't without its teething problems, however, and SCP-938 almost made an escape in 1991. Biocontainment and Research Site 06 suffered a Silent Night breach scenario, and SCP-938 was able to cause considerable damage to the site's infrastructure. The building itself was left completely unsalvageable, and the capacitor bank for storing the entity had to be rebuilt before SCP-938 was recaptured. The new capacitor bank was moved to Biocontainment and Research Site 07 and kept in a fully electrical insulated storage warehouse. The entire structure was built to have no wiring or electrical systems of any kind, with no metal supports in the concrete it was constructed from. Even staff with pacemakers or metal prosthetics aren't allowed inside. There is nothing conductive, nothing metal, nothing electrical. In short, there is no way SCP-938 could ever escape again. Hopefully, at least. Just as long as no one brings anything electronic into Storage Warehouse 0. Unfortunately, on December 21, 2005, a Foundation doctor entered the warehouse as a part of a routine inspection of the creature's ongoing containment. What this doctor had clumsily forgotten was that he had been carrying a USB flash drive on his person and didn't realize his mistake until the next day. After he recognized his error, he submitted the memory stick for examination, only to find that everything stored on it had been wiped and replaced with indecipherable, meaningless data. All we can really do is hope that the data is all that was on that flash drive. After all, surely SCP-938 wasn't able to breach its containment again and escape hidden on a USB stick, right? Perhaps it's best to play it safe, just in case. Next time there's a thunderstorm in your town, maybe leave home and go for a drive somewhere far away for a while. The last thing you'd want is something lurking throughout the wires in your house, waiting and ready to strike. Now go check out SCP-3999, I am at the center of everything that happens to me, and SCP-5031, yet another murder monster for more mysterious, anomalous entities from the SCP Foundation.